An ex-Marine sniper turned quiet ranch wife ambushes a convoy of stolen prototype weapons, then holds off a midnight raid by mercenaries during a thunderstorm. Those are just two of the pulse-pounding moments waiting for you in this story. Want to know how one woman, a handful of loyal deputies, and an entire small town stare down corrupt officials, outlaw bikers, and a billion-dollar arms syndicate? Stick with us to the very last page to see whether justice or chaos claims Copper Ridge Valley. If you love smart, high-stakes action wrapped in heartfelt community spirit, smash that subscribe button right now. Your support lets us keep bringing you fresh, binge-worthy tales every week, and it ensures you never miss the next twist in Lucia Davenport's fight for home and honor. Ready? Let's dive back into the firefight. Montana's Copper Ridge Valley greeted the morning sun with a quiet splendor that belied the tensions brewing beneath its picturesque horizon. Lucia Davenport, a woman with gentle eyes and strong calloused hands, stood at the edge of her ranch property, gazing toward a row of distant pines as dawn's light revealed the rolling fields. Lucia's neighbors thought of her as a typical ranch wife, sharp with horses, superb at baking apple pies for the county fair, and an unwavering fixture of local community events. She rose early each day to inspect fences and walk the property, doing the things that any dedicated rancher might do to keep the land healthy and profitable. Yet even in the slow shuffle of her well-worn boots, there was a trace of precision that few noticed. Her steady gaze at the tree line near the ravine, the way she paid attention to faint noises, and the subtle caution in her stance suggested something deeper, something more profound than ordinary ranch chores. Most folks around Copper Ridge Valley simply believed Lucia's calm presence was shaped by decades of ranch life. Marcus Davenport, her husband, maintained their horse stables while also looking after feed deliveries to local farms. The couple had called this land home for 20 years, forging a life marked by modest success and quiet determination. Their biggest local claim to fame was, as far as the gossip mill was concerned, Lucia's unbeatable apple pie recipe and Marcus's ability to fix almost any piece of old machinery. No one found either attribute suspicious. If anything, the Davenports were recognized for a generosity that shone whenever a neighbor came calling. A spare tractor part here, a few bales of hay there, always given with a kind smile. But Lucia often recalled another life, a life few here could imagine. Her steady hands had once cradled a rifle instead of a fence tool. Her keen hearing had been honed in the deserts and mountains of distant conflict zones. For nearly 15 years, she served under a different name, Specter Zero, in the United States Marine Corps. She had been known for uncanny marksmanship, unrivaled fieldcraft, and stealth. The official record stated she had 84 confirmed kills as a sniper, though the real number, tucked away in classified files, was rumored to be far higher. The missions themselves were so highly classified that not even her official case officer knew the full scope. To her foes, she was a phantom. To her commanding officers, she was an indispensable weapon. And to the world at large, she simply did not exist. Retirement had come quietly. The impetus was a mission that turned too secret, too high stakes. The mental exhaustion of living perpetually in a crosshairs-laden world was enough to make Lucia desire a normal life. Over time, she found solace in Marcus's quiet ways and in the ranch's open fields. She grew comfortable with being simply Lucia Davenport, a ranch wife. Even her husband only partially understood the magnitude of her former identity. Though she had told him some details about her service, she spared him the grim specifics. Now, as she watched the pale fingers of sunlight reach over the fields, Lucia had no intention of returning to that old life. Yet she sensed trouble brewing. This valley was about to be thrown into chaos by men who didn't realize what kind of person lived in their midst. The first hints of that chaos had begun weeks earlier, with distant rumbling on the roads and the sight of unfamiliar motorcycles. Lucia had been fixing a stray patch of fence near her orchard when she heard the deep, throttling growl of 3 bikes cruising past the property line. It struck her as unusual. Most local riders favored a more relaxed style. These 3 roared by in tight formation, acting as if they were scouting the territory. She noted the shape of their silhouettes, the thickness of their tire tracks in the dirt along the county road, and the time of day they appeared. Later, she overheard fleeting talk at the local feed store about new faces in the county, Men in black leather jackets with a snarling beast emblem on the back that read, Iron Mongrels MC. At first she brushed off the sightings. After all, Montana's scenic routes often drew motorcycle enthusiasts, especially in milder months. But these riders kept reappearing, each time with more numbers. The name Iron Mongrels began to surface in local chatter, and it wasn't the good-natured sort of gossip. The group's nominal leader, a sharp-eyed man called Victor Viper Russo, was rumored to have strong connections to out-of-state criminal networks. The local diner owner, Gloria Maxwell, mentioned that these bikers never paid for food and had used intimidation tactics on other patrons. Lucia filed away each tidbit, though publicly she pretended mild disinterest. She was careful to mask her concern, answering folks with, "Oh, that's unfortunate," while making sure she collected every detail. As the weeks progressed, more unusual incidents began piling up around the valley. Barbara Gibbons, a longtime rancher to the north, hastily sold her land under suspicious circumstances. Word was that she had been visited by a rough pack of bikers, and soon afterward decided it was in her best interest to retire to an apartment in a neighboring county. Then the same scenario repeated itself at two other ranches. The selling price each time was well below market value, and the entire process wrapped up in record speed. Rumor had it the new owners of these properties were front men connected to the Iron Mongrels, though no official evidence confirmed that yet. At each glance, Lucia recognized a pattern reminiscent of forceful expansions she had once witnessed overseas. When you wanted strategic land, whether for smuggling routes, hidden bases, or safe houses, you leaned on the locals until they had no choice but to yield. The only difference here was that it was happening in a peaceful Montana community, not a war-torn region. Most people in the valley didn't understand the subtle signs of encroaching infiltration, repeated rides passing by at odd intervals, quiet intimidation visits, and phony real estate transactions. But Lucia saw it all from a vantage point no one else possessed. She had orchestrated similar strategies herself once upon a time, though under the aegis of national security, not criminal gain. Despite her suspicions, she kept up appearances as a devoted ranch wife, picking apples from her orchard, managing her brood of horses, and offering a friendly wave at passing neighbors. Inside, though, she began systematically planning for contingencies. By the time the Iron Mongrels reached her doorstep with an offer to buy the Davenport's land, she wanted to know precisely who was behind them, how they operated, and how to dismantle their efforts without drawing attention, if it came to that. On a crisp morning, as golden sunlight crept over the dewy grass, Lucia caught the first direct glimpse of what she suspected was a purposeful drive-by on her land. She had already completed her early routine, feeding the horses and mending a loose board near the chicken coop, when she heard the approach of engines. Tucking a strand of dark hair under her hat, she pivoted to see 5 motorcycles rolling up the dirt driveway. She immediately recognized the central figure, tall, lean, with a cocky tilt to his shoulders. The patch on his sleeveless leather vest identified him as Viper, the apparent leader. Flanking him were riders sporting nicknames like Phantom, Fang, and Tempest stitched onto their cuts, each wearing the Iron Mongrels insignia. Lucia stood by her white picket fence, adopting an expression that was half wariness, half polite curiosity, the way any average ranch wife might greet uninvited visitors. But within her chest, her heart stayed calm, her nerves steady. She was already plotting distances, angles, and possible confrontation outcomes. The Iron Mongrels parked their bikes in a semicircle, casually boxing her in. One of them, a man with a shaved head and a scar across his cheek, dismounted and leisurely scanned the outbuildings, as though casing the property. "Morning, ma'am," Viper said with a cordial nod that didn't reach his eyes. "We're out for a ride, admiring the nice farmland around here. You know, land's been turning over quickly these days. Don't suppose you've had any thoughts about selling?" He delivered the line with the kind of false amiability that might fool someone unaccustomed to intimidation. Lucia gave him the polite shake of her head. "Sorry," she responded, forcing a faint, uneasy smile. "My husband and I haven't considered selling, Mr." He tipped his chin. "Russo, but friends call me Viper." The man's grin showed tobacco-stained teeth. "We've got some well-paying investors who see a bright future in Copper Ridge Valley. You might not get a better offer than the one we'll bring." It's an excellent time to consider your options. Lucia noticed how the other bikers spread out, clearly an intimidation tactic. Fang hovered by the wooden porch steps, tapping his boot against the first rung. Phantom had stepped to the edge of her small vegetable garden, seemingly interested in the fresh tomatoes. Each one was putting on a show of casual curiosity while sizing up every detail. She knew enough about infiltration teams to realize they were taking mental notes. Entrances, windows, the barn's loft, the distance between the main house and the equipment shed. Appreciate the interest, but we're quite settled here, Lucia replied, keeping her voice careful. She let a small quiver slide into her tone, as though she found their presence unsettling. My husband's probably up at the orchard, so he'd be the one to talk money with if we ever changed our minds. Viper's stare lingered on her for a few seconds longer than comfortable. Then he laughed. No problem, ma'am. We'll be on our way. Enjoy the sunshine. The group kicked up dust as they pulled out, leaving Lucia with the sense of an unspoken threat hanging in the air. She watched them go until the last engine roar faded, exhaling slowly. They had shown their hand, albeit subtly. In that moment, Lucia realized that if the iron mongrels had any inkling of her real background, they'd have thought twice about stepping onto her property so brazenly. That afternoon, Marcus Davenport returned from delivering hay bales to a neighboring farm. He found Lucia leaning against the corral fence. Her eyes settled on a point in the distance. He recognized the tension in her shoulders. Despite the calm expression on her face, she was troubled. When he asked what was wrong, she described the morning visit, every detail meticulously recalled. Marcus's brow furrowed at the mention of Viper Russo. He'd heard rumors from the local supply store that the iron mongrels were pressuring other landowners. But now they were on the Davenport's doorstep. How hard did they push? He asked, hooking his thumbs into his belt loops, the posture of a man who was preparing for a fight. Marcus wasn't a hothead. He was methodical and calm. Lucia had always admired that about him. But she also knew he wasn't clued in to the deeper set of skills she carried, though he was aware she had served in the Marines. She told him about her marksmanship and reconnaissance roles, but had not fully unveiled the lethal extent of her past missions. She believed it wasn't necessary for him to know all of it, until now perhaps. They asked if we'd sell, Lucia replied, but it felt more like an ultimatum hidden behind a friendly offer. They were assessing the property, looking at vantage points, evaluating the barn, doing more than just real estate talk. Marcus's gaze flickered to the orchard. We both know that's not normal. I've heard from some folks that once these bikers show up, trouble follows. People are forced to sell or get run out. Maybe we should talk to the sheriff. The local sheriff was Sheriff Hanover, a man who had so far maintained a mostly benign reputation. But Lucia had heard from a rancher friend that Hanover seemed uncharacteristically nonchalant about these new arrivals and their rumored intimidation. Some said the sheriff insisted the iron mongrels were part of a legitimate land development group and that everything was above board. I'm not sure the sheriff will be on our side, Lucia said softly, scanning the horizon. I have a suspicion he might be compromised, or at least not motivated to help. The pattern of these quick land sales, the buyers connected to the same shell companies. It's too organized to be random. We need to be careful, Marcus. He considered her words, eyes drifting over to the orchard. I hate to think we'd have to move, Lucy. But if it comes down to safety... She placed a hand on his arm. Though she put on a thoughtful expression for him, inside she was resolute. There would be no running. Not from criminals. The Lucia Davenport of 5 years ago might have avoided direct confrontations in an effort to maintain normalcy. But the old reflexes from her days as Specter Zero stirred again, reminding her that a strategic offense could save more than just her own land. We're not moving, she said. This place is ours. We built it from the ground up. We stand our ground. Besides, she added with a half-smile that rarely surfaced, I might still know a trick or two if it comes to defending our property. Sure. Marcus caught a fleeting glimpse of that part of her he rarely saw, ruthlessly competent, calm under pressure. Though she was his wife, he occasionally forgot she'd been someone else before. Someone who could handle far more than a handful of bikers if pushed. Yet he couldn't guess the full scope of who she truly was and how dangerous she could be to any threat that dared challenge her home. The iron mongrel's presence in Copper Ridge Valley grew impossible to ignore. Over the next few days, Lucia heard multiple stories of harassment. Gloria Maxwell, who owned the local diner and general store, witnessed Viper and two of his lieutenants, Phantom and Gargoyle, swagger into her shop one afternoon. They demanded coffee, laughed at locals, and left without paying. It was the brand of intimidation that wore down a town's morale, reminding everyone that a new force had arrived and intended to stay. One older man objected, but Gargoyle pinned him to the wall by the collar of his shirt until his face turned red. Sheriff Hanover had been called. He arrived only after the bikers had gone and simply suggested that Gloria file a complaint with the county clerk. Lucia, in her meticulous way, compiled these incidents like puzzle pieces, storing them in a small notebook she kept hidden in the tack room. She wrote down dates, times, the number of bikers involved, and any details about their attire or patches. Habits learned from reconnaissance missions never died. She learned that Fang had a habit of pacing near store windows, scanning reflections. Tempest was easily bored and often disappeared to smoke outside. The more she observed, the more she realized these were not run-of-the-mill troublemakers. Some possessed hints of professional training. Their spacing when they walked, the subtle hand signals they gave each other, telltale signs of a group used to coordinated action. Meanwhile, the conversation around town grew bleaker. Folks whispered that after being strong-armed, more ranchers had cut quick deals with unnamed buyers. Even more disturbing were whispers that the local clinic, run by Dr. Veronica Montgomery, had received visitors who implied that her license might face complications if she did not comply with their demands, namely, turning a blind eye to certain private medical needs for individuals who might show up with suspicious injuries. Dr. Montgomery confided in Lucia that men with bandaged gunshot wounds or nasty knife gashes had begun trickling in at odd hours, paying in wads of untraceable cash. When Dr. Montgomery pushed for official reports, the men threatened to close her down. One overcast afternoon, Lucia visited Dr. Montgomery at her clinic under the pretense of checking on her own persistent cough. The two women had known each other for over a decade. Veronica had served 2 years as a combat medic in her youth, another detail that only Lucia was fully aware of. Thus, Veronica was a bit less frightened than the average small-town doctor. She showed Lucia a bruised arm she'd gotten while trying to stand up to one of the bikers, as well as a note that read, "Stay cooperative or regrets will follow." "Have you talked to Sheriff Hanover?" Lucia asked quietly. "He came by all right," Veronica replied, frowning. "He listened to half my story, then claimed I had no evidence. Advised me to be more open-minded about new folks in town. It's a dead end." Lucia's instincts confirmed the sheriff was compromised. Perhaps he was on the biker's payroll or under some other form of leverage. Whatever the case, the official routes were blocked. If the community was to be saved, it would have to come from those who refused to be intimidated and knew how to fight back. Carefully, methodically, and with a precision the iron mongrels would never anticipate from unassuming locals. That evening, a chill wind swept across the Davenport ranch. Lucia found herself staring at the reflection of the setting sun in the old barn's window. Memories of her military past tugged at her consciousness, unbidden and a bit unwelcome. She recalled the final missions she had undertaken as Specter Zero. Infiltration deep behind hostile lines, neutralizing threats before they blossomed into larger crises. Each operation had been so secretive that even her official record remained heavily redacted. She had parted ways with that world, or so she believed, but now she recognized a similarly escalating situation. Only this time, it was unfolding in her own backyard. Marcus joined her near the fence. "Still thinking about the iron mongrels?" he asked. She gave a slight nod. "Yes, and I can't shake the feeling that they're more than just a random outlaw motorcycle gang looking to exploit a small town. There's something bigger at stake." She didn't share all her suspicions yet. Suspicions that the land around Copper Ridge Valley might be of particular strategic value, perhaps as a trafficking route for weapons, drugs, or something worse. Marcus brushed a hand through his hair. "I'm worried about you getting too involved." Lucia turned to face him, a softness in her eyes. "I know, but I have to do something. I can't watch these people bully the town into submission. And you know we're going to be next on their list if we keep resisting their offers." They talked about next steps, considering who might still be trustworthy in the county government. The name Deputy Simone Brady came up. She was relatively new, someone who had served in the National Guard prior to joining the department. Lucia remembered meeting her briefly at a community picnic. Deputy Brady carried herself with an air of moral fortitude, someone who believed in upholding the law, not bending it. If anyone in the sheriff's department might help, it would be her. Sure enough, that same night, Lucia dialed Deputy Brady's personal number, a contact gleaned from an old event roster. After a brief greeting, Lucia gingerly broached the subject of the iron mongrels, the forced sales, the intimidation, and the suspicion that Sheriff Hanover might be compromised. At first, Simone sounded guarded, but as Lucia spoke, she heard the deputy's breathing grow sharp, followed by a faint curse word. Brady eventually confirmed that she had seen things that made her deeply uneasy. Official documents going missing, bizarre property condemnation, notices that had no justification, and an influx of well-dressed out-of-towners who occasionally met with Hanover behind closed doors. Lucia asked if the deputy had any evidence. "I'm working on it," Simone replied in a subdued voice. "But I'm only one person. I don't even know who in the department I can trust, besides maybe a couple of the older deputies. Still, if you can gather real proof, photos, documents, I'll do what I can." They ended the call with a cautious agreement to share information. Lucia felt a pulse of renewed purpose. She had once been part of an elite network built on secrecy and unwavering trust. Now, ironically, she might be forging a small, covert alliance right here in Montana, battling a threat that had no idea they were up against a woman with a sniper's eye and a Marine's resolve. 2 days later, Lucia decided it was time for a more direct look into what the iron mongrels were doing. Instead of waiting passively, she hopped into her old pickup truck, a sturdy vehicle that had traversed muddy ranch roads and mountain passes for years. She told Marcus she'd be picking up supplies in town, which wasn't exactly a lie. She did need to restock feed and vet medication. However, she also planned to swing by the newly sold properties, the ones rumored to be under the MC's control. If anyone questioned her, she'd claim she was just a curious neighbor who took a wrong turn. Her first stop was the Gibbons Ranch, recently sold by Barbara Gibbons in a lightning-fast transaction. The new owners had posted signs reading private property, no trespassing, but the gates remained open. Lucia parked just outside the fence line and observed. Several men she didn't recognize were unloading crates from a large trailer. They had the same style of black leather vests, though some wore t-shirts with the emblem of a skull and wrench, perhaps associated with the iron mongrel's supply arm. She noted the vehicles. One large cargo van with tinted windows, another pickup with out-of-state plates. Both spelled organized, not random. When she lifted her phone to snap a quick picture, she did so discreetly behind a shipping catalog she kept in the truck. She drove on, feeling a prickling at the back of her neck as though she were being watched. Sure enough, about a mile down the road, she saw a single motorcycle following at a distance. Its rider wore dark shades and a beanie helmet. No visible patch. Lucia kept to the speed limit, refusing to let on that she suspected any tail. Eventually, the biker turned off on a side road. She exhaled. The last thing she needed was a confrontation out in the open. In town, she made a genuine stop at Gloria Maxwell's diner. While sipping coffee, she overheard two ranchers complaining about property taxes going up unexpectedly. "Town board says it's for infrastructure, but we ain't seen no new roads," one man grumbled. Lucia suspected it was another method of pressuring owners to sell. Everyone was feeling the squeeze from some angle. Sheriff Hanover's squad car was parked outside, but the sheriff himself was nowhere to be seen. "Probably chatting with folks he likes better," Gloria said with a note of cynicism. After finishing her errands, Lucia took a detour toward the local clinic, hoping to catch Veronica Montgomery for a quick conversation. She found the doctor in the back parking lot, rummaging in her trunk for medical supplies. No patients were around, giving Lucia a chance to speak freely. "We need tangible evidence," Lucia told Veronica. "Anything that can link these men to extortion, threats, something beyond hearsay. Deputy Brady says she'll run it up the chain if we can get it." Veronica lifted a brow. "You're that determined to fight them?" Lucia nodded, eyes unwavering. "They'll keep taking until we give them a reason to stop." She paused, struggling with her next words. "There's a side of me, from before, that knows how to handle a situation like this, but that might escalate things. So I'll gather proof first, then I'll make sure they can't ignore it." Veronica nodded solemnly, placing a reassuring hand on Lucia's shoulder. Together, they agreed to remain vigilant, share information, and work discreetly. All the while, the iron mongrels tightened their grip, not knowing that beneath Lucia's unassuming exterior lay the instincts and training of a woman who had once been America's most feared sniper in clandestine operations. Lucia's nighttime routine quietly transformed into something akin to recon maneuvers. After dinner with Marcus, who had begun noticing her edginess, she would slip out with a headlamp and a small digital camera, disguised as a typical piece of ranch equipment. She set up trail cams at various vantage points around the ranch perimeter, cleverly concealed in the brush or camouflaged against fence posts. These cameras weren't for spotting coyotes or stray deer. They were there to catch any suspicious activity. If the iron mongrels tried sneaking onto the property under the cover of darkness, Lucia wanted footage. She also scoured topographic maps of Copper Ridge Valley, cross-referencing them with property records. The pattern became clearer. The newly purchased lands formed a corridor leading north, toward an older network of disused logging roads. Some of those roads, Lucia recalled, connected to a historically abandoned railway depot. It was an isolated area that once served as a crucial shipping point for timber. Now it would be perfect for smuggling contraband, firearms, narcotics, or any illicit cargo, right through the valley without drawing attention on the main highways. In her past life, Lucia had participated in intercept missions that targeted exactly these types of corridors. She recognized the logic. Purchase or coerce ownership of enough properties to have total control of the route, set up legitimate operations as a front, then funnel illegal goods at night. The next step typically was either to compromise local law enforcement or intimidate them into complacency. Sheriff Hanover evidently was already in their pocket. At the end of each covert patrol, Lucia would return to the ranch house and slip quietly into bed. Marcus would stir, half asleep, murmuring concern. "Did you check on the fences again?" he asked one night. She pressed a comforting hand against his shoulder. "Just being cautious," she replied. She could see the mix of trust and worry in his eyes. He wanted to protect her, but he also respected that she had abilities he didn't fully comprehend. It was a delicate balance. She was grateful for his support, even if it meant he was sometimes left in the dark about the extent of her actions. One particular evening, Lucia's cameras paid off. She retrieved the memory cards at dawn and found footage of 3 bikers approaching her property line around 2 a.m. They lingered near the gate, appearing to test the lock or look for weaknesses in the chain. Another camera captured one individual scanning the area with a flashlight, then making a quick phone call. The angles and clarity weren't ideal, but it was enough to show probable trespassing intent. She copied the files, planning to share them with Deputy Brady. However, Lucia suspected it wasn't yet enough to spur a larger investigation. The iron mongrels clearly had a bigger scheme at play. Trespassing on the Davenport ranch was just a fraction of it. She needed something more damning, links to large-scale crime, evidence of specific threats, or a direct admission caught on camera or recording. If she could compile that, even compromised officials might be forced to act. And if they still didn't, well, Lucia wasn't above using the same brand of quiet intimidation that had once made her a legend on the battlefield. Days melted into a tense, watchful week. The iron mongrels continued roaming the valley's roads in groups of 3 to 5 riders, always passing the Davenport ranch at least twice a day. Marcus stayed on edge. He tried to keep busy with usual chores, fixing a broken water pump, stacking hay, rotating the horses in the different pastures. Meanwhile, Lucia refined her intelligence gathering. She chatted with neighbors under innocent pretenses, gleaning clues about which out-of-towners had visited them, which suspicious contracts had been waved under their noses, and what kind of financial pressure seemed to be building. Lucia also scheduled a discreet meeting with Deputy Brady at the far edge of town, in an unused gravel lot once employed for school bus storage. They parked their vehicles at opposite ends and walked to the center, both wearing civilian clothes to avoid attention. Deputy Brady's eyes flicked around, wary of being tailed. She'd come prepared with her own tidbits, certain county documents that showed puzzling property rezoning requests. These requests were rapidly approved without public input. "Follow the money," she murmured as she handed them over. "You'll see the same real estate development group name popping up, but with different shell companies behind it. In exchange, Lucia shared her early morning camera footage and summarized how these bikers were systematically surveying her ranch. She watched the deputy's expression tighten. Simone Brady was evidently outraged, but she had to maintain composure. "The sheriff doesn't want to hear it," she explained. "Every time I try to bring up new evidence, he shuts it down or misplaces the paperwork. I think he's too deep in their pockets to back out now." "So what's next?" Lucia asked, slipping the deputy's documents into a weatherproof folder. Brady sighed. "My only hope is to gather enough proof that the state or feds can't ignore it, something that bypasses the local chain of command. But that requires more manpower, more resources, and I can't request them officially without tipping off Hanover." Lucia nodded. "I'll do my part. One thing you should know, I have some experience with infiltration. If an opportunity arises for me to get inside one of these properties and see what they're storing, I might do it. But I wanted you to be aware." Deputy Brady looked at her curiously. "Infiltration? Were you some kind of investigator in the military?" Lucia's lips curved slightly. "You could say that." She didn't elaborate. If Simone knew she'd once been an elite sniper codenamed Specter Zero, it might raise more questions and potential liabilities. For now, the deputy seemed satisfied with the vague answer. They parted ways, each returning to everyday appearances. Later that day, Lucia found her phone vibrating with a call from Dr. Montgomery. The doctor sounded nervous, explaining that a group of men, likely from the Iron Mongrels, had come in with bruises and lacerations, demanding treatment off the record. When Veronica tried to log their injuries, they threatened to trash her clinic. "They also talked about a bigger meeting coming soon," she whispered. "Said they had no time for delays. Something about a major shipment." Lucia's pulse quickened. A major shipment could mean contraband, guns, drugs, or worse. This might be the break she needed. If she could document or intercept that shipment, it would be the smoking gun. But it would also be dangerous. The kind of operation that might require the old Lucia to resurface completely, rifle, tactics, and all. Faced with the prospect of a looming major shipment, Lucia's mind churned with the strategic possibilities. She recognized that if the Iron Mongrels and their cohorts were moving illicit cargo, they'd pick a time and route they believed were safe from law enforcement. Given the pattern of newly purchased land forming a corridor, she guessed they might use those old logging roads after dark. So she began quietly scouting them. One evening, after ensuring Marcus had turned in, Lucia loaded her truck with what looked like typical ranch equipment: rope, tarps, and a few feed sacks. Hidden beneath these mundane items was a high-grade pair of night vision binoculars, remnants of her Marine Corps days. She drove to the outskirts of one of the vacant properties rumored to be a staging area. Parking behind a thicket of pines, she killed the lights and proceeded on foot with the night vision goggles. Beneath a moonlit sky, the land was a tapestry of subtle movement and hush. She moved with cat-like silence, placing each step deliberately to avoid branches or dry leaves that might crackle. Reaching the crest of a small hill, she settled behind a fallen log. Her vantage point offered a clear view of a wide gravel lot. There, under the faint glow of a single utility lamp, she saw an assembly of trucks and motorcycles. Figures moved about, some loading crates, others looking at documents or checking phones. The night vision revealed more detail. The crates were wooden, about 3 feet long and a foot wide, stenciled with some kind of code. Lucia zoomed in, noticing what appeared to be black lettering that might read "Equipment, Nachhorn." This could be anything from stolen electronics to firearms. She leaned toward the latter guess, given the group's aggression and some of the overheard threats. It was a tense observation. A couple of times, a man with a flashlight made a perimeter sweep. Lucia flattened herself against the log, heart beating steadily but not anxiously. She'd been in far more dangerous hide sites overseas, with patrols armed to the teeth passing just yards away. Back then, she'd learned to calm every muscle, every breath, merging with the environment until she practically disappeared. This was the first time in years she'd called on that same primal skill. The taste of it was bittersweet, familiar yet laced with memories of missions she'd hoped to leave behind. She recorded video using her phone, ensuring to keep it on silent mode and shielded from potential reflections. She captured 5 minutes of footage showing the men loading crates into 2 large trucks, each bearing license plates from neighboring states. She also identified a tall, broad-shouldered individual who seemed to be calling the shots. Even men with iron mongrels patches deferred to him. He wore civilian clothes but stood with a certain authoritative posture that Lucia recognized as military or paramilitary. Another piece of the puzzle, an external operator or coordinator. By the time she slipped back to her truck, she felt a surge of clarity. The iron mongrels weren't just rowdy criminals. They were part of a well-funded, methodical enterprise. That explained the sudden rush of property buys and hush-hush real estate deals. If she could get this footage to the right people, possibly to a state agency that outranks Sheriff Hanover, maybe a sting operation could be arranged. But in the pit of her stomach, Lucia sensed more complexity. This might go beyond typical contraband. Her gut told her something bigger was about to drop, and if so, she'd be forced to embrace the full extent of her old skill set before the valley fell under the iron mongrel's iron grip. By daybreak, Lucia was back at the ranch, the recorded video discreetly copied onto multiple SD cards. Marcus, already awake and making coffee, peered at her dusty boots with concern. She gave him a quick, reassuring smile, explaining she'd driven out to check a potential drainage issue along the orchard's far edge. He frowned, sensing there was more she wasn't saying, but didn't press. The silence hung with an unspoken understanding that Lucia was moving in directions he couldn't fully follow. Even so, he trusted her judgment. That morning, after a brief rest and a shower, Lucia had a phone conversation with Deputy Brady. She described the late-night activity she'd witnessed, the crates, the trucks, and the presence of that tall, commanding figure. Simone Brady listened, rapt. That could be enough to at least prompt a request for state-level backup, the deputy said. If I present it to Sheriff Hanover, though, I'm sure it'll go nowhere. But if I can get a hold of the state attorney's office, maybe they'll respond. While that plan brewed, Lucia continued her daily tasks. The threat of the iron mongrels hung over everything like a storm cloud. A ride into town revealed more trouble. Dr. Montgomery's clinic had been vandalized overnight. Spray-painted graffiti on the side wall reading, "Comply or else." Furious townspeople gathered to see the damage, and a hush fell over them when two bikers casually rolled by, smirking. The sense of helplessness was palpable. It was exactly the atmosphere the iron mongrels hoped to create: fear, submission, and eventually capitulation. Yet some folks began to quietly resist. Gloria Maxwell started a small neighborhood watch group, meeting at her diner after hours. She told Lucia about families determined to remain in Copper Ridge Valley. They exchanged stories, jotted license plate numbers, and discussed how to better protect their properties. A retired Army sergeant from further east in the county offered self-defense classes. The seeds of grassroots defense were sprouting, though still overshadowed by the MC's looming presence. One afternoon, Lucia caught a conversation between two Iron Mongrels members, Fang and Tempest, outside the feed store. They were too absorbed in their argument to realize she was around the corner. "We need more men," Fang hissed. "The boss says the big fish will be here in days, and we're nowhere near done clearing out the holdouts." "Relax," Tempest replied. "We got the sheriff in our pocket, and the rest are folding like cheap tents." Fang just spat on the ground, retorting that certain ranchers, like the Davenports, were too dumb to see reason. That was enough to confirm an escalation was imminent. Lucia's collected evidence, the suspicious real estate deals, the stolen glimpses of men unloading crates. These events were converging. She realized that once those big fish arrived, the criminal operation might become even more entrenched. Or worse, they'd clamp down on the valley with lethal force. If law enforcement at the state or federal level didn't act in time, Lucia would have no choice but to act herself, and she knew precisely how to do so. For years, she had dreaded returning to that skill set. But faced with the possibility of losing the ranch and allowing innocent people to be crushed, the soldier in her was reawakening. The day of reckoning arrived faster than Lucia anticipated. Deputy Brady called on a Thursday afternoon, voice trembling with urgency. She'd uncovered something big: transcripts of encrypted communications that had filtered through the department's server. Someone, likely Sheriff Hanover, had accidentally left them stored in a hidden folder. Brady retrieved them before they could vanish. The files revealed references to a high-value arms deal happening within the next 72 hours. The logs mentioned prototype hardware, international buyers, and instructions to secure the route through CRV, presumably Copper Ridge Valley. Lucia felt her jaw tighten as she skimmed the partial transcripts. This was no mere local intimidation racket. The Iron Mongrels were facilitating a major weapons transfer, possibly with foreign or paramilitary groups. The mention of prototype hardware chilled her. In her Marine career, Lucia had occasionally been briefed on advanced small arms or specialized gear that certain black market dealers would pay fortunes to obtain. If that was the sort of contraband passing through Copper Ridge, it could explain the well-funded push for property acquisition and the infiltration of local law enforcement. Brady tried to hide her frustration. I brought this to the sheriff, hoping he'd be forced to escalate it. He insisted it was false intel and threatened to fire me if I tried to contact any outside agencies. Her voice broke slightly. Lucia, if we don't do something soon, these guys are going to stage their operation unchallenged. The sense of betrayal in the deputy's tone mirrored the frustration Lucia felt. I've got evidence too, Lucia said. We can compile everything, video, photos, logs, these transcripts, and funnel them to the state or even the FBI. I have an old contact who might know how to expedite this. But if that fails, we have to be prepared to intervene directly. Brady exhaled. All right, I'm with you. Send me whatever you have. I'll try the official routes one last time. If we hit a wall, then we act. That evening, Lucia told Marcus the unvarnished truth. An arms deal was imminent. The sheriff was compromised, and foreign buyers might be coming to finalize something huge. She tried to underplay the risk, but she couldn't avoid explaining her plan. She intended to infiltrate the old Gibbons ranch during the night of the deal, capturing real-time evidence of the illegal transfer. If possible, she'd sabotage the transaction, ensuring the criminals didn't leave with the arms. Marcus paled at the idea, though he nodded grimly. This is your call, but I won't let you do it alone if things get dangerous. She placed a hand gently on his shoulder. I appreciate that, but I need you as backup here, in case they try attacking the ranch while I'm gone. If they realize who I am or what I'm doing, you'll be a target. Though she rarely invoked that commanding tone, her voice now carried the finality of a Marine superior. Marcus, swallowing his protest, agreed. Into the late hours, Lucia readied her gear. The dusty rifle case that had remained locked in the attic was pulled out. Within it lay a high-powered rifle with custom modifications, the kind she had once carried on Black Ops missions. The heft was familiar in her arms. She spent time cleaning the weapon, checking the scope, zeroing in for distances typical of the valley's terrain. She prepped a sidearm too, along with a suppressed pistol for close encounters. If the Iron Mongrels thought Copper Ridge Valley was easy pickings, they had no clue they'd awakened the soldier within Lucia Davenport, once known to America's enemies as Specter Zero. Night fell under a moonless sky. Clouds thickened, shrouding the stars. It was perfect cover for clandestine operations and for criminals hoping to move contraband unseen. Lucia parked her truck half a mile from the Gibbons ranch, near a bend in a seldom-used logging road. She wore dark, nondescript clothing, black cargo pants, a fitted jacket, and sturdy boots. Her braided hair was tucked beneath a cap. Over her shoulder, she carried a canvas bag holding her rifle, assembled in pieces for stealth. Closer to her body was a smaller holster with a suppressor-equipped pistol. Each step she took was measured and silent, echoing her old training. She advanced on foot, navigating by memory and minimal usage of her flashlight. At a low ridge, she set up a small observation point behind thick brush. Through night vision binoculars, she saw the ranch's wide gravel lot. Floodlights had been erected around makeshift loading docks, bathing the scene in harsh electric glare. She counted half a dozen bikers standing guard, wearing their Iron Mongrels patches. Near them were several men in tactical gear, each one appearing more professional, probably ex-military or private security. Two large trucks sat with rear doors open, and a cluster of heavy wooden crates awaited loading. Her pulse remained even. This was the vantage point from which she would gather definitive evidence. Reaching into her bag, she assembled her rifle with practiced efficiency, locking each section into place until it formed the sleek silhouette of a high-powered marksman's tool. Through the rifle scope, she zeroed in on each figure, cross-referencing them in her mind. She recognized Viper Russo, commanding the bikers with a wave of his gloved hand. Another man, tall and broad, wore no outward insignia, but barked orders as if he was in charge of the contractor team. This had to be the same paramilitary figure she'd seen before. A third, somewhat older man in a sheriff's uniform paced nervously at the edge. Sheriff Hanover. So much for plausible deniability. He was right in the thick of it. The operation was well organized. Lucia watched them load crates while two men checked items off a manifest. She hoped the small camera strapped beneath her rifle's scope would capture enough detail to read the labeling on those crates later. Vehicles began to arrive in a slow, staggered manner. First a black SUV with tinted windows, then another with out-of-state plates. Several men in suits stepped out, accompanied by guards holding concealed submachine guns beneath their jackets. Lucia zoomed in. Their faces were grim, businesslike. They exchanged handshakes with the paramilitary leader, not with Viper, confirming her theory that the iron mongrels were muscle, not top-level operators. For almost 30 minutes, she recorded the entire transaction. The men opened one of the crates, revealing metal cylinders that looked suspiciously like advanced rifle barrels or possibly rocket components. She couldn't be certain at a glance, but her gut twisted. This was sophisticated weaponry, not typical black market rifles. She recognized part of a code that might be tied to a restricted military supplier. If that was true, the iron mongrels were part of something far more extensive. Lucia's instincts told her that once these criminals finished, they'd vanish, possibly leaving the valley in ruin. She considered her options. She could deliver this footage to the authorities tomorrow, but would it be enough to stop them? Or should she intervene now, strike while they were gathered, sow confusion? Yet to make a move alone was unbelievably risky. Then again, there was more at stake than her safety. If these men succeeded, they'd funnel lethal technology to unknown hands. Her internal debate crystallized in one realization. Specter Zero had always been tasked to eliminate threats before they could escalate. Maybe that was exactly what needed to happen here, in the darkness of a Montana ranch. One more time. Lucia Davenport lay prone on the cold earth for what felt like an eternity, her rifle steady against her shoulder. She had an unobstructed view of the makeshift loading area where the iron mongrels, along with their shadowy paramilitary associates, transferred crates of illicit weaponry. The tension in her spine reminded her of nights in desolate foreign deserts, where she had once waited hours, sometimes days, to line up a single critical shot. Now she hovered on the brink of intervention, torn between the desire to disrupt this criminal deal immediately and her obligation to ensure overwhelming proof made its way to the right authorities. She watched through her scope as an SUV with tinted windows backed into the lot. Men in tailored suits stepped out, conferring with the tall contractor who seemed to be running the show. Viper Russo, the iron mongrel's ostensible leader, paced in the background, a restless hawk overshadowed by more serious predators. They pried open one of the crates, revealing metal components that gleamed under the floodlights. Even from her vantage point, Lucia recognized hardware far beyond ordinary black market rifles. Some pieces resembled advanced ballistic technology, the kind she'd only heard rumors about in her Marine Corps days. Experimental weapons never intended for standard forces, let alone criminals. Her heartbeat stayed steady. She had told herself, no direct confrontation unless there's no other choice. If she fired even a single shot now, the region would become a war zone, and the criminals could scatter before any official backup arrived. She also risked drawing lethal retaliation toward the local community and her husband Marcus. Yet her training and moral compass screamed that letting these men walk away with advanced weaponry was an unforgivable outcome. Anger simmered at the edges of her focus, but she forced it down, remembering how patience had always been her greatest ally on covert missions. From the corner of her vision, she noted a figure skulking behind an SUV, Sheriff Hanover. His stance spoke of deep unease, as if even he couldn't stomach seeing the sheer scale of this operation. Lucia kept her scope centered, wishing he might show a glimmer of conscience. But he stood there complicit, occasionally fiddling with a radio. Instead of stepping forward to do his sworn duty, he conferred with the tall contractor, who handed him a slim envelope. Clearly, his silence had a price. Lucia gave it another 10 minutes, capturing additional video footage from different angles. She recorded license plates, partial faces, and at least 3 separate firearms brandished in plain sight. All the evidence she needed was locked onto her camera's memory card. Eventually, the men sealed the crates and loaded them into one of the trucks, presumably preparing for immediate departure. If these shipments made it onto the highways, they might vanish for good. Lucia tensed, wrestling with the choice. Continue playing the long game or sabotage them right now. In the end, she decided that if they left with the cargo tonight, a critical chance would be lost. The only question was how best to disrupt them without losing her life or destroying the evidence. Slowly, she brought her eye back to the scope, exhaled, and fired one deft shot. It struck not a person, but the truck's front tire, sending a reverberating pop echoing through the yard. Shouts erupted, men scrambled. In the confusion, Lucia fired again, blasting a second truck tire. She slung the rifle over her shoulder and melted into the darkness, confident she had left them enough chaos to slow their departure, but not so much that they would fan out and hunt her down en masse. Pandemonium exploded in the yard. Viper and two of his iron mongrels, unprepared for a covert sniper attack, darted behind crates, yelling curses into the night. The paramilitary contractors immediately formed a perimeter, weapons raised, scanning the dark hills and ridges with flashlights. Their formation was disciplined. Too disciplined for standard criminals. Lucia watched from a new vantage point 100 yards north, breathing quietly behind a rocky outcrop. She'd moved fast after those two crucial shots, making sure her muzzle flash wouldn't reveal her exact location. She tracked the men's reactions with practiced calm. A couple of them blindly returned fire, their muzzle flashes ripping through the night sky. But they had no clear target. Lucia was already repositioned, using the darkness like a cloak. Her training reminded her of the cardinal rule of a successful sniper. Shoot and scoot. Never linger in the same spot. They would search for her, but if she stayed disciplined, they'd find only darkness and the chilling realization that someone out here could match, if not exceed, their own operational skill. One contractor barked into a handheld radio, calling for reinforcements. Another directed a few men to flank the perimeter. Over by the punctured truck tires, Viper kicked the dust in frustration. The suits, the presumed buyers, rushed back into their SUV, evidently deciding they wanted no part in an open firefight. Lucia observed them spin around the yard and then tear off onto the road, leaving behind a portion of their security detail. Perhaps they'd planned to rendezvous at a safer location, or they simply decided to cut their losses and flee. Her immediate goal was achieved. The major shipment was immobilized, at least temporarily. The second truck still had intact tires, but the men couldn't simply load everything into that one vehicle and drive off without reorganizing the crates. They were spooked, uncertain how many attackers they faced. Lucia considered taking another shot to disable the second truck, but she worried it might trigger an all-out manhunt. Besides, she had enough footage and had just orchestrated enough confusion to slow the operation. If the criminals remained pinned here for even an hour, Deputy Brady might have time to gather what few resources she could muster. Yet Lucia also understood the risk. If the paramilitary contractors regained their composure, they could systematically sweep the hillside with thermal optics or night vision gear. She glimpsed a flicker of green light from one of the men's goggles, confirming her suspicions. They did have advanced equipment. Another reason to exfiltrate swiftly. Her vantage point was good, but not perfect. If they deployed drones or called in heavier backup, she'd be compromised in minutes. Deciding she had done enough for one night, Lucia slithered backward down the ridge, hugging every bit of cover. She cradled the rifle gently, making sure not to snap any twigs. She thanked the moonless sky as she reached the old logging road where her truck was parked. Climbing inside, she kept the lights off, rolling slowly away until she was a safe distance from the property. Emotions churned in her gut. Triumph that she had thwarted the deal, anxiety over the possibility she might have provoked something more violent, and a sober realization that this was only the beginning. The iron mongrels and their allies would not let an attack like this go unpunished. Nonetheless, she felt something else stirring, an echo of the fierce determination she'd known in her Specter Zero days, a readiness to stand and fight on behalf of those who couldn't defend themselves. At first light, Lucia returned to the ranch and found Marcus already up, pacing the kitchen like a man awaiting critical news. The moment she walked in, he studied her, noticing the smudges on her jacket, the tension in her face, the faint smell of gun oil. She set her rifle bag on the table with a weary sigh. "I disabled one of their trucks," she said quietly. No casualties on their side as far as I know, but they won't be moving that shipment very easily. Marcus leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. They're going to retaliate. I'm aware, Lucia replied, removing her cap and running a hand through her hair. Exhaustion tugged at her, but adrenaline still thrummed in her veins. She explained the entire nighttime operation, her vantage point, the suits who arrived, the advanced weapon parts, and her decision to fire only at vehicle tires. Marcus listened carefully, occasionally wincing at the danger she'd put herself in. Still, he didn't reproach her. He recognized the ironclad logic. Letting that convoy slip away with military-grade weapons would have been disastrous. Once she was finished, Marcus took a deep breath. So where do we go from here? Because if these men figure out you were behind it, they'll come after the ranch. That's not an if, Lucia. It's a when. She nodded, tired but resolute. I need to get this footage to Deputy Brady. In the meantime, we secure the property as much as possible. We coordinate with whoever we can trust. The iron mongrels are about to escalate, and we either stand strong or watch them crush the entire valley. Awu, Marcus nodded, eyes flicking to a corner of the kitchen where a dusty shotgun leaned. I guess I'd better prepare more than just a few birdshot shells. Despite the seriousness, Lucia smiled. I'll help you pick the right loads, she said. Then the smile faded. But you should know, this might bring out a side of me you haven't really seen. I can't just wait for them to assault us. I learned how to handle preemptive strikes, covert sabotage, infiltration. If it means keeping us and our neighbors safe, I'm prepared to do it again. Marcus gently squeezed her hand. We'll do what we must, Lucy. This is our home. His voice steadied. Just promise me we'll stay mindful of how far we push. I don't want a war zone in Copper Ridge Valley. They ate a quick breakfast in tense silence. Afterward, Lucia drove into town, keeping an eye on her mirrors for any sign of being followed. She wore a baseball cap low over her face, though it was hardly a disguise. Inside her truck was a weatherproof container holding the memory cards. She'd already backed them up onto 2 separate USB sticks hidden in different locations at the ranch. She wasn't taking chances. When she reached the outskirts of town, Deputy Brady met her in a small, disused parking area behind an abandoned storage facility. The deputy's eyes went wide when Lucia showed her the footage. This is massive, Brady breathed. International arms, advanced hardware, and we clearly see Viper Russo, plus what looks like a team of ex-military contractors. She broke off, rubbing her forehead. I'll send this to the state authorities, but I don't know if they'll move quickly enough. Lucia's expression hardened. Then we find people who will, and if they still won't act, we make sure the iron mongrels can't push their plan forward, one way or another. Brady nodded. Understood. Just watch your back. These men won't sit idle now that someone's fired literal warning shots. They parted, each aware that the day would bring consequences. Lucia only hoped the storm about to erupt wouldn't sweep away the innocent townspeople who had placed their unspoken faith in her and her quiet brand of vigilance. Word traveled fast in Copper Ridge Valley, even without official channels confirming what had happened. By midday, murmurs swept through the town that some kind of late-night gunfire had taken place on the old Gibbons ranch. A few residents heard distant pops and saw flashes, but no one knew who was involved. Sheriff Hanover's office put out a vague statement about fireworks, or possibly trespassers spooked by guard dogs. Most folks didn't buy it, especially since the iron mongrels were seen riding around town in a foul temper. At Gloria Maxwell's diner, the conversation was tense. People noticed the bikers had become more confrontational than ever, storming in, knocking over chairs, and demanding to know if anyone had seen an armed stranger near Gibbons Ranch. One local teen who popped off at them got pinned to the wall by his collar until a few other men intervened. Clearly, the mongrels were trying to flush out whoever had the audacity to interfere with their operations. Despite the intimidation, a quiet wave of determination spread among the residents. In hushed conversations, they started coordinating watch shifts, placing phone calls to neighbors, and sharpening any sense of communal defense. A retired police officer living on the west side offered to train volunteers in basic firearm safety and property monitoring. Almost overnight, the valley began to galvanize against the threat. Lucia observed these developments with cautious optimism. She admired their spirit, but she also worried that if things turned violent, Well-meaning neighbors wouldn't stand a chance against trained paramilitary killers. Meanwhile, Lucia's phone buzzed with an urgent text from Deputy Brady. No traction with state authorities yet. Lines tied up. Feels like someone's stalling. Trying a federal angle next. Lucia cursed under her breath, suspecting the corrupt influence behind the scenes was more entrenched than they had realized. She thought of making direct contact with an old Marine comrade who had ties to a federal agency. But that was a desperate move. It risked exposing her true identity in more official circles, which she had spent years avoiding. Still, it might be the only option to bypass local and state corruption. That evening, she drove home from the Orchard Supply Store with seeds and fencing materials in the back. Shadows lengthened across the road, creating pockets of dusk. She felt an uneasy tension at the nape of her neck. Near a bend, a large motorcycle pulled out suddenly, nearly clipping her front fender. She braked hard, heart thumping. The rider slowed, forcing her to match his reduced speed. In the side mirror, she spotted two more bikes closing in. They were boxing her in, one at the front, two at the rear. Lucia's jaw clenched. She recognized the danger of an armed confrontation out here, especially if they forced her off the road. Her immediate thought was to maintain composure, so she took a breath and steadied the wheel. The lead biker, wearing a vest that read Tempest, glanced back with a twisted grin, then signaled her to pull over. Lucia pretended ignorance, as though she thought they just wanted to pass, but they tightened their formation, leaving her little choice. She spotted a vantage point, a wide turnout on the right, which at least gave her an escape route if things got ugly. She'd have to be very careful. 3 bikers with unknown armaments against 1 woman in a pickup. She pulled over slowly, her pulse steady despite the adrenaline surge. Reaching into the center console, she slipped her hand around the handle of a small revolver, something she kept for emergencies. If these men planned to threaten her, they might discover a harsh truth about the quiet ranch wife they'd been underestimating all along. As Lucia rolled down her window, the lead biker stopped just feet away, revving his engine for effect. The other 2 dismounted behind her truck, effectively blocking her from reversing. The lead man, Tempest, took off his helmet, revealing short dark hair and a scar over his left eyebrow. He didn't wear a typical grin of a rowdy biker. His expression was predatory, eyes cold. "Evening," he said, voice carrying over the purr of the engine. "You're Lucia Davenport, aren't you? Word around town says you and your husband have been mighty resistant to our offers." Lucia forced a mild look of confusion. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" Her grip on the hidden revolver remained firm, though she kept it below window level. Tempest smirked. "Name's not important. We just want to have a friendly conversation. Hop out of the truck, if you please." She eyed the 2 men behind her. One had an iron mongrel's patch reading Fang. The other wore no name patch but held a menacing stance. "I'm comfortable talking from here," she replied. Tempest nodded to Fang, who stepped to the truck's rear window and rapped on it. "We ain't asking." The threat in his voice was palpable. Lucia's mind raced. She could attempt to speed off, but the angle of her truck and the bikers' positions made that risky. They might shoot out her tires, or worse. Another option, get out, appear compliant, see if they'd let slip any information before she maneuvered for an advantage. The third option was immediate confrontation, something she wanted to avoid unless absolutely necessary. She decided to test for a nonviolent exit first. With deliberate slowness, Lucia reached for the door handle while maintaining her grip on the revolver. She slid out, boots crunching on the gravel. The evening light revealed more detail in the men's faces. Tension lines, a mild flicker of uncertainty. They didn't yet realize she might be armed. That was to her advantage. Tempest nodded. "Smart. We heard there was some excitement last night over at Gibbons Ranch. Big noises, trucks messed up. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" Lucia shrugged. "I was at home tending to chores, heard some ruckus in the distance, but that's not my land." Fang stepped closer, face twisted in suspicion. "Your neighbors are saying you've been snooping. Sides, you and your fancy Marine background, maybe you were out there popping off rounds." Tension coiled in Lucia's gut. They had dug enough to learn she served in the Marines, though they probably didn't know the full extent. She met Fang's glare calmly. "I served years ago. I'm just a rancher now. If something's going on at Gibbons Ranch, that's not my business." Tempest let out a low laugh. We think otherwise. See, a piece of the operation got messed up real bad last night, and you're the one person who's been nosing around. We know your buddy the deputy has some logs, some footage. You best be real careful, Ms. Davenport, or folks might start getting hurt, like your husband, or that friend of yours at the clinic. Hearing Dr. Montgomery threatened lit a spark of anger in Lucia's chest. She forced her expression to remain passive. I'll keep that in mind, she said, voice tight. Tempest's gaze flicked to her truck bed, noting the fencing supplies. You going straight home now? That was the plan. He revved the bike again, leaning in. Good, because next time, the conversation won't be so friendly. Stay out of grown men's business, or you'll regret it. With that, he jerked his head, and the other two stepped away from blocking her. Lucia took the opportunity to climb back into her truck. She started the engine, hearing their motorcycles roar behind her in a show of intimidation. But as she drove away, the old warrior in her stirred with grim resolve. The iron mongrels had just guaranteed they'd see the side of her they feared most. Lucia's hands shook slightly on the steering wheel as she left the biker trio behind. Though her gaze remained steely, adrenaline spiked in her veins, a taste of the old combat stress that once fueled her operational precision. She breathed in and out, regaining control. She had to stay calm and analytical, two traits that kept her alive in war zones. Arriving at the ranch, she parked the truck near the barn and scanned the property line. Marcus rushed out from the stable, worry etched on his face. I was getting concerned, he admitted. Got a call from Gloria at the diner. She said some mongrels were looking for you. Are you all right? She nodded, recounting the roadside confrontation. Marcus listened, fists clenched. They threatened Dr. Montgomery? That's low, even for them. We have to warn her. Also, maybe we should get more folks set up for mutual protection. Lucia agreed. She dialed Veronica Montgomery immediately, telling the doctor to stay extra vigilant and avoid traveling alone. Lock the clinic at night, Lucia warned, and if you see any suspicious vehicles, call me or Deputy Brady. The doctor, though shaken, promised to take precautions. Inside the house, Lucia and Marcus began a serious discussion about fortifying the ranch. They had modest means, some barbed wire sections, locked gates, and a few motion sensor floodlights. But they decided to expand on that. Marcus proposed reinforcing the barn's loft as a watch post with a broader field of view. Lucia had other ideas, placing hidden booby traps at specific vulnerable points outside the property lines. Nothing lethal, but enough to slow or deter an intrusion. They worked until nightfall, installing new locks, adjusting the angles of existing floodlights, and setting up tripwires connected to noise alarms at critical junctures in the fence. The routine felt eerily reminiscent of preparing a forward operating base in a conflict zone. At one point, Marcus paused, hammer in hand. Is this really our life now? Turning our home into a fortress? Lucia brushed sweat from her brow. I'm afraid so, at least until we get rid of these criminals. The authorities seem compromised or slow. We don't have the luxury of waiting for someone else to do the job. If the mongrels come, we need enough warning to either defend ourselves or escape. Marcus swallowed, nodding grimly. We stand together, though. She placed a hand on his shoulder, meeting his eyes. Always. But if it comes down to a real firefight, I need you to promise you'll do exactly as I say. No heroics. I'm the one trained for this. He looked at her, a mix of pride and concern. I understand. Exhausted but a bit more secure, they finally went inside. Over a late supper, Lucia checked her phone, finding no updates from Deputy Brady. She dreaded the possibility that the deputy might be overwhelmed by the iron mongrels' growing aggression. After a restless hour flipping through the local news stations, none of which reported the real story, Lucia resigned herself to a few hours' sleep. Tomorrow she would finalize her plan to route the evidence through channels beyond the local or state level. She had an old contact in the Marines who might help if she could swallow her reservations about opening that door to her past. As she drifted off, her mind lingered on the question, how many days before the iron mongrels returned with far greater force? She'd always believed her ranch was a safe haven, but safety was an illusion in the face of greed and brutality. When dawn came, she'd be ready to push back. Deputy Simone Brady's call came at 6 a.m. Lucia was already awake, sipping black coffee and reviewing her inventory of ammunition. The deputy's voice came through in a whisper. underscored by tension. Lucia, I'm at the station. Something's off. Hanover's gone. The front desk says he left early this morning with a duffel bag. Some of the other deputies are looking for him. Apparently, he demanded a few days' leave on short notice. I suspect he knows the arms deal is compromised and is bolting. Lucia paced across her living room, phone pressed to her ear. Where does that leave the rest of you? Are you in charge now? Brady let out a quiet, humorless laugh. I wish. The department's chain of command still lists Lieutenant Oakes as next in line. But Oakes is, well, I don't trust him either. He's never openly aligned with the mongrels, but he's turned a blind eye. I fear the station might be in chaos, half of them oblivious, the other half complicit. I'm trying to hold things together with the few good deputies. What about the videos, the evidence we compiled? I sent them to a regional FBI contact. Haven't heard back. I also tried the state attorney's office again. They said they're reviewing the material. Meanwhile, an anonymous tip came in claiming a group of heavily armed men were spotted heading north of town. Could be the paramilitary contractors. I can't get official backup unless Oakes approves, and he's not convinced it's a credible threat. She sighed, frustration evident. Lucia's anger flared. The system's inertia was playing right into the criminals' hands, allowing them time to regroup. All right, she said briskly. I'll do a little recon up north, see if I can figure out their next move. But if you don't hear from me in a few hours, something might have gone very wrong. Brady hesitated. Be careful. If they've discovered your identity, they won't hesitate to use lethal force. Lucia knew the risks. She ended the call, scribbled a quick note for Marcus, who was out in the barn feeding the horses, and gathered her gear. Within minutes, she was behind the wheel of her truck, rolling down the gravel driveway under the pale glow of morning light. The biting autumn air whistled through a cracked window as she headed north, following a route that meandered parallel to old logging roads. This was still ranch country, dotted with thick woods and winding hills. Perfect cover for hiding a small army or ferrying contraband. She made a couple of discreet stops along the way, speaking with residents who lived on remote properties. Most had heard or seen nothing unusual, though one older ranch hand recounted glimpsing multiple motorcycles speeding down a back road the previous evening. He couldn't identify them beyond their black leather and rowdy demeanor. Lucia thanked him and pressed onward. Eventually, she came to a fork where the main route veered east, but an unpaved road continued deeper into the forest. A battered sign reading "No Outlet" stood near it, partly overgrown by weeds. Lucia recalled that in her property research, this route had once connected to the old railroad depot. She parked her truck behind a clump of pine trees and continued on foot, armed with her concealed pistol and the small digital camera. If the paramilitary group had set up a forward base, she wanted evidence without giving herself away. The deeper she went, the quieter her surroundings became. No birds sang, and no wind rustled the branches. Her instincts sharpened. This hush was unnatural, like the tension before a firefight. She found a trail of fresh tire tracks leading around a rocky bend. Slowing, she approached the bend with the caution of a seasoned soldier. If the iron mongrels or their contractors were here, she might be walking into their territory alone. Crouching low, Lucia carefully peeked around a thicket of shrubs. Her gaze fell upon a wide clearing where an abandoned lumberyard building loomed. Its corrugated steel walls rusted at the seams. A scattering of vehicles occupied the makeshift lot. 2 dark SUVs, a couple of pickup trucks, and a group of motorcycles with the Iron Mongrels emblem on them. She also spotted a smaller trailer. Maybe it held additional contraband or equipment. Stepping deeper into the undergrowth, she sought a vantage point along the perimeter. Once she found a large fallen log, she set up her camera, using its powerful zoom lens to document what she saw. A handful of men patrolled the area. Some wore MC vests, others donned the more subdued black and gray attire of private security or paramilitary contractors. None of them seemed relaxed. They moved with watchful urgency, as though anticipating an attack or preparing for a big move. Lucia quickly recognized the tall leader she'd seen before at Gibbons Ranch, the paramilitary figure who carried himself with imposing authority. He conferred with a man wearing a business suit, possibly another buyer or an agent for a bigger syndicate. Their conversation was inaudible at this distance, but Lucia watched the suit gesture emphatically toward a map laid out on the hood of an SUV. The tall man shook his head, tapped the map, and pointed to the building. Two iron mongrels approached, carrying crates from inside the building to the trailer. Lucia zoomed in, hoping to catch identifying marks on the boxes. Her chest tightened when she noticed partially visible stencils referencing E-Tech and strings of alphanumeric codes. If her memory served her right, E-Tech was a defense contractor rumored to have lost prototypes in a theft overseas. She'd heard about the fiasco from an old Marine buddy who was tangentially involved in investigating black market trafficking of advanced weapon parts. This was no run-of-the-mill gun running. These were specialized components that could fetch astronomical prices from foreign militias or terror networks. Satisfied she had enough video evidence, Lucia considered her next steps. If these men were planning a major move, perhaps relocating all the contraband to a final buyer, she needed to find out when and how. The most direct approach would be to eavesdrop, but that meant creeping closer, possibly inside the building. She weighed the odds. A direct infiltration carried enormous risk, multiple armed hostiles, minimal cover, and unknown interior layout. Yet if she failed to get a timeline, they might vanish without a trace, taking the stolen technology with them. She decided to push her luck. After stowing her camera, she slithered along the tree line until she reached the structure's far side. The building's walls bore patches of peeled metal, some large enough for a person to duck through if they were careful. One such opening, overshadowed by a sagging gutter, seemed promising. Lucia moved in a wide arc to avoid the main entrance, which was guarded by two men with assault rifles cradled at their waists. At the building's rear, she found an ancient roll-up door partially rusted and closed. A gap at the bottom suggested that if she lifted carefully, she might slip underneath. She tested it with gentle pressure, wincing at the slight screech of metal. She paused, heart pounding, listening for footsteps or voices. Silence. She gave it another nudge, enough to crawl through on her stomach. At last, she emerged inside the building, stifling a groan as she found herself on a concrete floor covered in dust, wood shavings, and old nails. Nerves on high alert, she rose to a crouch. Shafts of light filtered in through cracks in the walls. She could faintly hear men talking somewhere to her left, near the front. She brushed off the dirt on her jacket and began a stealthy advance, determined to learn everything she could about this operation, no matter the risk. Inside, the lumberyard had been repurposed into a covert warehouse. Rows of tall shelves stood empty, but improvised wooden tables filled the center space, laden with crates, documents, and disassembled weapon components. Lucia crept between stacks of old pallets, careful not to disturb any stray debris. She could see men through the gaps. About 5 of them stood in a loose circle near a set of crates that looked fresh off a military base. The tall paramilitary leader was mid-lecture, pacing aggressively. "Tires shot out, shipments delayed. We're behind schedule," he snapped, pointing at a blueprint tacked onto a wooden post. "If we don't finalize transport by tomorrow night, our entire corridor is compromised. The buyer's not going to wait, especially after that fiasco at Gibbons Ranch." One of the iron mongrels muttered a curse. "We tried finding who did it. We cornered some folks in town, but no one's talking. It's like they're protecting some ghost." The leader slammed his hand on the nearest crate. "We're not dealing with ghosts. It's 1 or 2 people meddling. Your job is to flush them out. Meanwhile, we'll move the prototypes tonight. Split them into smaller shipments if we have to." He then turned to a man with a black baseball cap, presumably second in command among the contractors. "Has the new route been secured?" The man nodded. "Working on it. We'll pass through the Pine Creek crossing, slip onto the old highway, and meet the buyer's cargo plane at a private airstrip. But we need local law enforcement interference at 0. A hollow laugh rippled from another figure. "Sheriff's out of the picture. Probably half the county cops, too. But that deputy, Brady, is still a problem. We might have to remove her." Lucia's stomach churned. The plan was dangerously concrete. A private airstrip, advanced stolen weaponry, and an imminent flight out. If they succeeded, these prototypes would vanish into the black market ether, potentially arming extremist factions around the world. The mention of "remove her" in reference to Simone Brady twisted Lucia's gut with rage. She had to warn Simone. Yet another voice, this one belonging to a lean man in a suit, cut in. "We have one shot. If we fail, the entire operation collapses. That means if anyone tries to stop us, we take them out. No more warnings." The group murmured agreement, then dispersed to gather gear or make phone calls. Staying low, Lucia inched backward, intending to exit before they spread out and discovered her. She had heard all she needed: the timeline tonight, the route, Pine Creek crossing to an old highway, and the final objective, an airstrip rendezvous. It was the perfect scoop. She could alert Deputy Brady, possibly rally a last-minute ambush, but the moment she turned, she nearly jumped. A bearded man in camouflage stood not 15 feet away, scanning the shelves. Lucia froze behind a stack of empty crates, barely daring to breathe. He looked in her direction, eyes narrowed. She crouched, swallowing. In that heart-pounding moment, an involuntary cough threatened to rise from her throat. Dust from the floor stung her nostrils. She pinched her nose, fighting it. Mercifully, the man moved off, apparently deciding there was nothing of interest in that corner. Lucia waited until his footsteps receded entirely. Then, step by painstaking step, she retraced her path to the rear door gap and slithered out as quietly as she had come. Outside, the sun's glare seemed harsh after the gloom inside. She wasted no time returning to the tree line and eventually back to her truck. Her pulse hammered with adrenaline, but clarity shone through. The criminals intended to move out under cover of night. She had a narrow window to organize a response, or watch the stolen prototypes disappear, leaving Copper Ridge Valley under the heel of men with no scruples and big ambitions. Racing back into town, Lucia dialed Deputy Brady, urging her to meet at the diner. Brady agreed on the condition they pick a booth away from prying ears. 20 minutes later, they sat in a corner, coffee cups steaming between them. Outside, a few iron mongrels cruised by, but they didn't seem to notice Lucia and the deputy tucked behind the diner's large frosted window. "Tonight," Lucia said, leaning in. "They're moving the prototypes tonight. The route goes through Pine Creek Crossing, then some old highway, and eventually to a private airstrip. My guess is it's that defunct strip near Sawyer Bluff. I remember reading about local land deals that included a small runway there. They have local law enforcement in their pocket, so the only obstacle is you and anyone you can muster." Brady rubbed her forehead, exhaustion etched in every line. "This is bad. I've tried calling in backup from the state troopers, but I keep getting vague answers, like there's red tape or a lack of personnel. It's suspicious. Either the mongrels are paying off the right people, or someone high up doesn't want to touch this yet. So we're on our own," Lucia concluded. "Or nearly so. Any deputies you can trust?" Brady pursed her lips. "Two for certain. They're rookies but loyal. Another might help if I show her enough evidence. That makes 4 of us, plus you and Marcus. But let's face it, we're outgunned and outnumbered." Lucia nodded. "Then we need a plan that uses the element of surprise and local terrain to our advantage. If we can intercept them en route, we might pin them in a choke point, disrupt the convoy until we can seize or destroy the cargo. If we can hold them long enough for the feds to show up, assuming they do, we might stand a chance." The deputy took a long sip of coffee, eyes flicking to the diner door whenever the bell jingled. "Pine Creek Crossing, that's a narrow pass with steep embankments on both sides. If we block them there, they'll have limited escape options, but they could also dig in and fight." Lucia's gaze hardened. "Then we fight smarter. We can sabotage their vehicles, force them to abandon the prototypes, maybe even cause a pileup. The key is to strike fast before they realize how few we are." Brady tapped her phone screen, scanning through messages. "We can't risk a big shootout near civilians. The crossing is remote, so that's in our favor. Still, the paramilitary guys are highly trained, and the iron mongrels won't hesitate to use lethal force. Not to mention, they might have heavier weaponry than just small arms." Lucia recalled the advanced gear she'd glimpsed. "We do what we must. I'd rather see those crates destroyed than let them vanish into the global black market." They hammered out details for another 10 minutes. Brady would gather her loyal deputies under the guise of responding to a vehicular incident in the Pine Creek area. Lucia would coordinate with Marcus to set up basic obstacles on the pass. Spike strips, perhaps a makeshift barricade that looked like a fallen tree. Once the convoy halted, Lucia would provide covering fire from an elevated position, while Brady and her team would attempt arrests, or at least secure the cargo. It was a risky, borderline vigilante plan, but waiting for official backup that might never come was no longer an option. They parted ways soon after. Lucia stepped out of the diner into the crisp afternoon air, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and resolve. In less than 12 hours, she'd either stop a massive arms trafficking operation or risk being overwhelmed by a force that had terrorized the valley for months. She could feel her old Marine instincts roaring to life, calm in crisis, lethal when cornered, unwavering in her mission. Copper Ridge Valley had no idea what was about to unfold in its quiet hills. Back at the ranch, Lucia explained the plan to Marcus in hushed, urgent tones. He listened without interruption, arms folded, occasionally nodding in grim agreement. "It's dangerous," he said when she finished, "but I don't see another way. If we let them pass tonight, everything we've worked for, this ranch, the people in town, the truth, gets lost." They spent the next few hours making final preparations. Marcus loaded the truck with coils of rugged chain, some old wooden boards, and a section of spiked metal strips he'd fashioned from leftover barbed wire. If they could create a convincing roadside obstruction, the convoy might be forced to slow down or stop just long enough for Lucia and the deputies to strike. Lucia prepared her arsenal. She checked her sniper rifle for the second time that day, ensuring the scope was zeroed and the bolt slid smoothly. She also packed a more portable carbine for mid-range engagements and a sidearm. Memories flooded back, of field missions where each weapon had a specific role, of old squads she once led. It felt almost surreal to be applying that same methodology on her own turf. They agreed on a simple communication system. Deputy Brady had provided them with short-range police radios set to a private frequency. By 9 p.m., Lucia and Marcus were on the move, driving an old back road that would lead them to Pine Creek Crossing from the west side. Deputy Brady and her small team would approach from the east. The sky was moonless again, stars faintly visible. The air carried the electric charge of approaching conflict. When they reached Pine Creek, the crossing's geography worked in their favor. Dense woods on one side, a rocky ravine on the other, and a winding, single-lane road carved between. A perfect ambush site if used well. Marcus parked the truck behind a thick cluster of pines. By flashlight, they placed a mock fallen tree barrier across the pavement, a large trunk section from a dead pine, supplemented by loose debris. Hidden beneath it lay the spike strips. Anyone barreling through would shred their tires. Lucia set up her sniper nest on a small cliff overlooking the pass. From here, she had a direct line of sight on the road's tight curve. She could also see across to where Deputy Brady and her two rookies, Kelsey and Brogan, hid behind a boulder. Another deputy, Rosario, was stationed further down the road with a flashlight to serve as a decoy traffic director, in case the convoy rolled in unawares. The plan was to funnel the target vehicles into the blocked area, force them to stop, then announce themselves as law enforcement. If the criminals surrendered peacefully, excellent. If not, Lucia would cover them. The hours ticked by, each minute stretching. Over the radio, Deputy Brady's voice occasionally crackled. "All quiet so far." Lucia responded in whispers, tension thrumming through her. She recalled old Marine mantras: steady breath, calm hands, mind on target. The forest around them was eerily silent, as though nature itself sensed the impending clash. Marcus, positioned near the truck with a hunting rifle, was her close support in case any bikers or contractors tried flanking from the woods. By midnight, Lucia felt sure the convoy would either arrive soon or not at all. Her heart hammered in time with the night's hush. Then at last, the distant growl of engines drifted through the darkness. Multiple motors, deeper than typical passenger cars. Headlights flickered far off, winding along the road toward Pine Creek. Lucia drew a long, steady inhale, aligning her eye with the rifle scope. The final confrontation was here. The convoy came into view. 2 trucks in the lead, a pair of motorcycles, and an SUV trailing. Their headlights cut swaths of white across the narrow road, shadows dancing among the trees. Lucia peered through her scope, spotting lumps in the truck beds, likely the crates. Alongside them, silhouettes of armed men, at least 7 or 8, possibly more inside the vehicles. Deputy Brady signaled over the radio. "Positions. Wait until they hit the barrier." Lucia acknowledged silently, flicking off her rifle's safety. Her crosshairs hovered on the lead truck's windshield, just in case it tried ramming the obstruction. The first truck rounded the tight curve. Its headlights illuminated the fallen tree trunk. Brakes squealed as the driver realized the road was blocked. The second truck slowed behind it, and the SUV pulled up short. The two bikers fanned out, engines rumbling. Lucia observed confusion ripple through them. One man hopped out of the lead truck to inspect the barrier. Then he crouched, as if noticing the spikes. She saw him gesture angrily. That was the cue. Deputy Brady flicked on her police lights, hidden behind the boulder, and stepped forward with weapon drawn. Her voice rang out. "County Sheriff, step away from the vehicles. Hands in the air." At the same time, Deputy Rosario emerged farther down the road with a flashlight, shouting the same command. Over the police radio, Lucia heard the tension in their voices. They were confronting heavily armed felons with only a handful of law enforcement backup. Predictably, chaos ensued. The paramilitary contractors scrambled, drawing rifles and taking cover behind the trucks. The iron mongrels on bikes spun around, looking for escape routes. One of them revved the engine to dart back down the road, but Lucia steadied her breath and fired a single shot into the asphalt near his front tire. Sparks flew and the rider swerved, forced to abandon the idea of a clean getaway. Now pinned, the criminals unleashed gunfire in multiple directions, bullets zinging off rocks and trees. Deputy Kelsey and Brogan returned fire, their shots echoing across the ravine. Brady ducked behind the boulder, calling out, "We have a search warrant for these vehicles. Surrender now." The reply was more gunshots, muzzle flashes lighting the night. Lucia zeroed in on a contractor who tried to flank around the second truck. Her shot struck the ground at his feet, an intentional miss to warn him off. He dove back behind the vehicle, cursing. Another paramilitary man attempted to line up a shot on Deputy Brogan. Lucia clipped him in the shoulder, a non-lethal hit that sent his rifle clattering away. She intended to minimize bloodshed, but they had to see reason quickly, or this firefight would escalate. From below, Marcus provided suppressive fire with his hunting rifle, forcing two iron mongrels to drop flat behind a ditch. Return fire pinged off the trunk of the Davenport truck. The dark forest flickered with muzzle flashes, and the smell of gunpowder filled the crisp air. Lucia maintained her vantage, systematically scanning for threats. Each time a shooter popped up, she squeezed off a round or forced them to duck. Her heart pounded, but her focus stayed ice cold. Memories of past engagements fueled her clarity. Control the chaos, protect your allies, neutralize the threat. Suddenly, the SUV revved, reversing in an attempt to flee. Lucia couldn't get a clean shot on the driver. She watched the vehicle swerve, nearly striking a tree. The driver seemed ready to bulldoze through the small blockade or find a side path. If they succeeded, they'd take some of the prototype cargo with them. Lucia decided to shift her aim, her scope centering on the front tire. Pop! She fired and the SUV lurched, the front tire shredded. Smoke curled from the rim as the SUV screeched to a halt. For a moment, the entire scene hung on a razor's edge. Criminals pinned, law enforcement outnumbered, bullets streaking. Lucia realized if the gunman chose to fight to the death, the casualties could be immense. They needed to break the criminals' morale before the firefight spiraled further. She whispered a single thought. Surrender, damn it. Don't make me kill you. Deputy Brady seized the moment. While gunfire momentarily lulled, she used her bullhorn to issue a final warning. This is your last chance. Drop your weapons and come out with your hands in the air. We have additional units on the way. It was a bluff. They had no sure reinforcements. But the criminals couldn't be certain of that. In the sullen hush that followed, Lucia watched as one paramilitary contractor, likely wounded, crawled out from behind the second truck, arms raised. Another followed suit. Then an iron mongrel tossed his pistol onto the road. The chain reaction spread, men swearing under their breath as they realized the situation was unwinnable. The lead truck's driver emerged, both hands high, yelling, "Don't shoot!" Two more criminals still clung to their cover, rifles in hand. Lucia settled her crosshairs on the side of their truck, ready to deliver a crippling shot if they opened fire again. A heartbeat passed. Then those last holdouts broke, dropping their rifles and flinging themselves prone. Immediately, Deputy Brady and her two rookies advanced, weapons drawn. They ordered the criminals to lie on the pavement, one by one, binding their wrists with zip ties. Brady's voice shook with relief and residual adrenaline as she called into her radio. Suspects in custody. We need immediate backup and medical assistance at Pine Creek Crossing. Lucia exhaled, her shoulders easing from the rigid posture she'd held for the last 15 minutes. She scanned the shadows to ensure no one else was lurking, then slung her rifle across her back and climbed down from her vantage point. Marcus remained near the truck, covering her approach, eyes wide at the devastation scattered around the road. Bullet holes in vehicles, shattered glass glinting under the headlights, men lying face down with zip-tied wrists, but no bodies. Lucia thanked whatever luck guided her shots. She hated killing, especially on her home soil, but she would have done it if any criminals had forced her hand. As she drew closer, she noticed one figure trembling in anger and frustration, the tall paramilitary leader from the lumberyard, kneeling with his hands behind his head. "You think this is over?" he spat. "You have no idea who you're messing with. Our backers will burn this entire valley to the ground." "Sure." Brady ignored him, finishing the zip tie around his wrists. One of the iron mongrels moaned, "Just take me to jail. Better than getting shot." Another grumbled that the boss, Viper Russo, wasn't even there, cursing that they'd been left high and dry. Lucia bent down, pulling a crate tarp aside, revealing a half-open container of sleek, black metal tubes with advanced digital readouts. Her gut clenched. These were no conventional rifles, some kind of prototype energy or rail-assisted guns, far beyond typical black market supply. This was a find that could shake national security circles. Deputy Brady joined her, breath-catching. "Holy hell, Lucia! This is bigger than we imagined. The state cops aren't the only ones who'll be interested in this. This is federal-level contraband. International, probably." Marcus hovered protectively, still holding his rifle. In the distance, faint sirens finally echoed. Perhaps the local volunteer ambulance or the sparse county patrol cars left unconvinced by corruption. Brady started securing the scene, reading off Miranda rights to those still cursing on the asphalt. Lucia took a moment to reflect. They had done the seemingly impossible, stopped a heavily armed convoy with a skeleton crew. Part of her felt immense relief. Part of her braced for the reckoning sure to come. While the criminals simmered in detention, Lucia stared at the crates, her reflection shining on their metallic surfaces. She knew, deep down, that this was just the tip of the iceberg. The criminals' backers, whoever they were, wouldn't walk away from such a loss without reprisal. The iron mongrels themselves might be only one tentacle of a far larger beast. And if she had gleaned anything from her time as Specter Zero, it was that severing one limb of a hydra rarely killed the whole monster. At the Pine Creek Crossing, the aftermath of the ambush played out in a blur of headlights and flickering red-blue strobes. A few county patrol cars finally rolled up, though Lucia Davenport suspected most of these officers were the ones not compromised by the iron mongrel's influence. Eagerly, they assisted Deputy Simone Brady in securing the detained criminals and tending to minor injuries among both the suspects and the deputies. Marcus Davenport stood guard by their makeshift blockade, rifle still in hand, but no further threats emerged from the night's shadows. Lucia's attention fixated on the seized crates. While officers snapped photos and cataloged the items, she approached them with careful deliberation. "This is advanced weaponry," she warned one of the patrolmen. "Not just fancy rifles, some kind of high-tech prototypes, maybe even energy-based or railgun components." Her voice carried the weight of experience she normally kept hidden. The officer looked puzzled but listened, taking notes to include in the official report. Deputy Brady had her hands full. She paced between the captured men, reading them their rights, ensuring no one attempted another breakout. At one point, she knelt by the paramilitary leader who glared daggers at her. "You messed with the wrong people," he hissed. Sweat dripped from his forehead as he pressed a hand to his bandaged shoulder. Lucia's shot had grazed him enough to incapacitate, but not kill. "We have connections so high, your entire department will be wiped out." Brady's jaw tightened. "I've heard enough of your threats. You'll be answering to federal charges for weapons trafficking, assault, and conspiracy. And don't forget that your buddies are in cuffs too." She cast a glance toward a scowling iron mongrel lying prone on the road, wrists zip-tied behind his back. "It's over." Yet Lucia knew it wasn't truly over. This was a major blow to the criminals, but the entire network that had supplied these prototypes Whoever funded the iron mongrels and the paramilitary contractors wouldn't simply vanish. They'd retaliate or regroup. Moreover, certain corrupt officials might attempt to bury the case. She glimpsed an incoming deputy who bore the rank insignia of a lieutenant, Oakes presumably, looking distinctly unhappy that Brady had orchestrated this sting. His expression was pinched as he examined the scene, half-heartedly acknowledging the success. "Brady," Lieutenant Oakes said, trying to keep his tone official, "I see you conducted an operation here. Surprising you didn't coordinate with the rest of us." His voice dripped disapproval. "I trust you have a warrant for all this?" Deputy Brady stiffened. "As acting lead officer in Sheriff Hanover's unexplained absence, I used the probable cause and evidence we had on these traffickers. I'll provide the paperwork." Oakes pursed his lips, glancing at the subdued paramilitary men. "We'll see how that goes. In the meantime, you'll place all these seized items under county lockup. Then we'll decide who to contact next." Flicker of something crossed his face, and Lucia feared that once the prototypes disappeared into county lockup, they might simply vanish or be tampered with. Sensing the risk, Lucia quietly pulled Brady aside. "We need these crates documented by an outside agency, FBI, ATF, anyone beyond the local chain of command, right now, or else your superiors might conveniently lose them." Brady nodded, grim. "I'll call the state attorney's office again, and I'll get a direct FBI contact on the line. This evidence must be out of local hands ASAP." With that decided, Lucia stepped away, scanning the quiet woods. The night sky had grown still once more, but her instincts told her a bigger storm brewed. The iron mongrels were partially crippled, yet men like Viper Russo remained unaccounted for. And the paramilitary leader's threat echoed, "We have connections so high, your entire department will be wiped out." She exhaled, a mixture of victory and dread. The hidden war for Copper Ridge Valley had just entered a new phase. By the time dawn broke, the Pine Creek crossing resembled a crime scene from a major city rather than a rural pass. Yellow tape cordoned off the area, and a handful of bleary-eyed deputies guarded the captured suspects. Some volunteers from the local fire department showed up to assist with traffic control, bewildered at the arsenal laid out on the roadside. Camera flashes flickered as authorities documented every piece of contraband. Lucia wondered how many had ever seen such weaponry outside of a sci-fi movie. Marcus brought Lucia a thermos of coffee, which she accepted gratefully. Exhaustion had begun to tug at her limbs. She glanced at the crates, recalling nights in foreign war zones where she'd infiltrate enemy camps to retrieve or destroy stolen military tech. She never expected to be doing something so similar in her own backyard. The familiar ache of shoulders and knees, stiff from crouching with a rifle, was a reminder that she was no longer in her 20s. Yet her resolve felt sharper than ever. Deputy Brady eventually corralled Lucia and Marcus to the side. "I spoke with someone at the FBI field office," she said quietly. "They're sending a team, but it might be another day or more before they arrive. Lieutenant Oakes is already grumbling about storing this evidence in the county impound. I need someone I trust to stand watch. If we let these crates out of our sight, they could vanish before the feds show up." Lucia exchanged a look with Marcus. "We'll do it," she said. "But what about all these men we arrested?" Brady frowned. "We'll hold them at the county jail. Oakes can't disappear them without raising suspicion. Not after so many witnesses saw us bring them in. But for the weaponry, he can claim national security or some chain of command nonsense to justify moving it if we don't stand guard." Marcus shrugged. "I'll stay out here, do shifts. Some of our friends from town might help too. We're not experts, but we can keep watch until the feds arrive." The deputy squeezed his shoulder gratefully. "Thank you. I'll try to rotate a couple of reliable deputies to support you. Just be cautious. If the iron mongrels or their backers make a move to reclaim this stuff, they won't hold back." Lucia felt an undercurrent of unease. The men they caught might well have radioed their superiors before being apprehended. That meant an entire strike team could roll in at any moment. Still, every minute they delayed the contraband's removal was another minute the authorities could gather evidence. "I'll bring extra gear from the ranch," she told Brady. "We'll set up a perimeter if needed." Lieutenant Oakes soon approached with a clipboard, trying to project authority. He eyed Lucia, clearly not a fan of civilians, stepping into police matters. "Miss Davenport, the deputy here says you'll be assisting with security. Fine. But keep in mind, you're not law enforcement. Don't do anything reckless. Lucia met his gaze coolly. We're just making sure the criminals don't retrieve their stolen hardware. Isn't that the goal? Oakes's nostrils flared. He mumbled something about proper procedure, then stomped off to boss around the rookie deputies. Lucia watched him go, well aware that Oakes might be a weak link in this chain, possibly corrupted or at least complacent. She vowed to remain vigilant. Glancing up at the emerging daylight, Lucia allowed herself a fleeting sense of relief. They had prevented a massive arms shipment from disappearing into the night. Still, the looming question, what next? If the iron mongrels were desperate enough to stage a raid to recover their cargo, would they strike openly? Or would they employ more insidious tactics, using political connections, bribery or sabotage? She suspected the latter. She also suspected that stopping them once wouldn't be enough to safeguard Copper Ridge Valley. The fight was far from done. Over the next 2 days, Pine Creek Crossing turned into a makeshift fortress. Deputy Brady coordinated rotating shifts of the few trustworthy county officers, while Marcus Davenport and several volunteers from the local neighborhood patrolled the perimeter. They erected a large canvas tent to shield the crates from the elements and set up floodlights for nighttime visibility. Every so often, a stray traveler would roll up, see the police presence, and hastily turn around. Word spread quickly that something big had been seized out near Pine Creek, and no one in town wanted to wander too close. Lucia spent her nights on site as well, sleeping in short bursts in the bed of her truck. She refused to let those advanced weapons out of her sight. Every time she dozed off, she dreamed of the infiltration missions from her past, closing in on hidden munitions caches, sabotage, silent takedowns. She awoke each time with her heart racing, half expecting to be pinned under desert stars with an enemy patrol approaching. Instead, she found the crisp Montana air and the quiet watchfulness of neighbors who had never handled anything more dangerous than a hunting rifle. Deputy Simone Brady made daily calls to the FBI, demanding an immediate presence. The replies were polite but non-committal, referencing resource constraints and bureaucratic processes. It was deeply frustrating. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Oakes tried multiple times to commandeer the evidence, citing the need for proper chain of custody. Each time, Brady blocked him, citing direct instructions from the state attorney's office. Lucia suspected Oakes was under pressure from whomever had replaced Sheriff Hanover, or possibly from the iron mongrels themselves. On the second night, Lucia decided to do a personal errand back to the ranch. She told Marcus she'd only be gone an hour. She needed fresh supplies, food, extra blankets, and a portable generator. Driving down the dark roads, she felt a surge of caution. The iron mongrels had scattered after their humiliating defeat, but they hadn't disappeared. She kept scanning the rearview mirror, expecting headlights to appear. Sure enough, as she neared the ranch, a single motorcycle roared up behind her. Lucia's grip on the steering wheel tightened. She'd faced a similar situation days ago. Now she was more prepared. As the bike drew closer, she flicked off her headlights, letting the moonlight guide her. The abrupt darkness seemed to spook the rider, who slowed a fraction. Then Lucia braked sharply, fishtailing the truck in a display of dust and gravel. She heard the biker skid behind her, cursing. Before he could recover, she punched the accelerator. Her truck surged forward, leaving the motorcycle sputtering in a cloud of dirt. When she arrived at the ranch, she jumped out, scanning the road behind her. No sign of the bike. She wasn't sure if it had been a curious drifter or a scouting mongrel. The short encounter reminded her that vigilance was a constant requirement now. She rushed about, gathering items from the barn, spare gasoline canisters for the generator, some canned food, and a duffel bag full of extra ammunition. The ranch felt unnervingly quiet, as if holding its breath for the next assault. In one of the closets, she found a heavy trunk that once belonged to her father, an old Marine Corps veteran. Inside lay a flak vest, battered but still serviceable. She hadn't worn body armor for years, but times had changed. Deciding caution outweighed comfort, she strapped it into the truck. Then she double-checked every lock and switched on all the security lights before leaving. Stepping outside, she scanned the horizon, half expecting a silhouette to appear. None did. But her instincts warned that this respite wouldn't last. The iron mongrels were wounded animals, and wounded animals often lashed out in the most vicious ways. By the third day, rumors began circulating in town that Sheriff Hanover had fled the county entirely. Some speculated he'd taken a bribe to keep silent. then skipped out once he realized he might face federal charges. Others believed the iron mongrels had turned on him for failing to secure the arms deal. No one had confirmation of his whereabouts. Lieutenant Oakes, still posturing as interim sheriff, became a regular nuisance at Pine Creek. He'd stroll in, scowl at the volunteers, and occasionally threaten to dissolve the watch. Yet he never made a decisive move, possibly fearing public backlash if he tried to remove them by force. Meanwhile, Lucia noticed a shift in the detainees' status. The paramilitary leader who'd threatened them so boldly was transferred to a more secure holding cell after a rumored escape attempt. A couple of the Iron Mongrel members began talking to the deputies, hinting that they might cut deals in exchange for leniency. The local jail was abuzz with speculation that they were turning state's evidence. Lucia felt a glimmer of hope that the entire criminal network could be exposed. On the other hand, she feared that if these men held high-value secrets, their superiors would try to silence them. Tensions rose further when local radio stations reported sightings of suspicious black SUVs roaming the back roads. Deputy Brady dispatched what few patrols she could, but no arrests were made. People in Copper Ridge Valley started carrying firearms more openly. Store owners erected metal gates or installed cameras. Even Dr. Veronica Montgomery's clinic reinforced its doors with heavy locks. Everyone anticipated that some form of retaliation was coming. Lucia's old contact in the Marines, now working private security, finally returned her call. She spoke in code, revealing minimal details. He listened with mounting alarm. "You're telling me you have advanced stolen prototypes and zero federal presence on site? That's insane. Let me reach out to some people." Lucia's relief was tempered by caution. If word spread too far, the criminals might send in specialized mercenaries to reacquire the goods before the cavalry arrived. Just when it seemed the standoff at Pine Creek might stabilize, an ominous twist occurred. One afternoon, Marcus and a volunteer named Gary, a retired logger, noticed a drone hovering over the confiscated crates, filming from above. By the time they raised their rifles, the drone zipped away, disappearing into the tree line. That same evening, they found footprints in the undergrowth near the perimeter, along with the faint smell of cigar smoke. Someone was scouting, gathering intelligence. Lucia confronted Deputy Brady. "They're planning something. Could be a nighttime raid or a direct assault. We can't keep this rig fortress here indefinitely with so few men." Brady rubbed her temples. "You're right, but we can't move these crates either. Lieutenant Oakes has to sign off, and he's dragging his feet. The FBI is supposedly en route, yet no official arrival date. We're in a bad spot." Lucia nodded grimly. "Then we ready ourselves. Tonight we double our guard. Post watchers at all angles. If they come, we meet them head on." Outside, clouds gathered in a bruised sky, threatening rain. Lucia surveyed the crates once more, reading cryptic manufacturer stamps. Each piece of hardware represented a global threat if unleashed. This knowledge galvanized her determination. She and Marcus would do whatever it took to ensure no one reclaimed these weapons. But she prayed silently that the storm on the horizon was merely rain, and not a harbinger of more bloodshed. That evening, sheets of cold rain swept across Pine Creek Crossing. Lightning flashed intermittently, illuminating the rugged silhouettes of pines and rocky slopes. The volunteers huddled in the large tent or under tarps, flashlights bobbing in the gloom. Lucia took her place near the crates, scanning the perimeter with a pair of night vision binoculars. Each thunderclap rattled the temporary floodlights, making the scene feel all the more precarious. Deputy Simone Brady arrived, shaking water from her jacket. She brought coffee in thermoses, distributing them among the watchers. "Any sign of movement?" she asked Lucia. "Nothing so far," Lucia replied, keeping her voice low. "But that drone earlier today spooked me. If they're gathering intel, they might have learned exactly how we're set up. This storm could give them cover for an attack." Brady sighed. "We're down to 2 county deputies on duty tonight, plus your volunteers. Oakes refused to send anyone else. Says the roads are too hazardous. Convenient excuse." Lightning flickered again, and for a moment Lucia thought she saw a shape move at the edge of the woods. She lifted her binoculars, just swaying branches. Her nerves were on high alert, every sense stretched. "We can handle ourselves," she assured Brady, though her own heart hammered with adrenaline. She had faced worse odds on foreign soil, But there she had possessed official resources and backup. Here she relied on a patchwork team of neighbors who had hardly fired a shot in anger before. She prayed their collective resolve would be enough. As midnight approached, the storm intensified. Rain pounded the tents and washed across the road in rivulets. The small generator sputtered once, but kept the floodlights alive. The volunteers alternated warming up in the back of Marcus's pickup, leaving a skeleton watch on the perimeter at all times. Through the howling wind, Lucia occasionally imagined she heard footsteps or muffled engines. Each time she signaled for quiet and scanned the darkness, but nothing materialized. Eventually, she let Marcus take a break while she roamed the perimeter with her carbine slung over her shoulder. The noise of the storm cloaked her footsteps. The swirling gusts tugged at her hood. She passed two volunteers who offered grim nods, eyes wide with tension. A primal sense of foreboding prickled the back of her neck. Then suddenly a sharp crack echoed, distinct from thunder. Gunfire. A single shot, then silence. Lucia pressed against a dripping pine trunk, heart thudding. Over the radio came Deputy Brady's urgent voice. "Shots fired near the southern slope. All units, check in." Lucia pivoted, sprinting toward the sound. She slipped on wet leaves but kept her weapon ready. Another shot split the night. She spotted muzzle flashes flickering from behind a cluster of boulders about 50 yards away. A volunteer shouted in alarm, quickly followed by return fire. Lightning flared, revealing silhouettes crouched in the brush. 3, maybe 4 men. This was no random potshot. Someone was attacking the perimeter. "Contact south side," Lucia barked into the radio. "Multiple hostiles. They're pinned behind rocks." She dropped to a knee, peering through her rifle's sights. A flash of muzzle fire drew her aim. She fired twice, not sure if she hit anyone, but hoping to suppress them. More voices shouted in the distance as the volunteer watchers scrambled. Rain plastered Lucia's hair to her cheeks. Her flak vest felt heavier with each step. She advanced carefully, mindful that these attackers might have night vision gear. Another thunderclap rattled the valley, followed by the staccato of gunfire. The confrontation was on. Somewhere behind her, Marcus and Deputy Brady would be rallying the rest. For now, Lucia moved like the Specter Zero of old, swift, calculating, prepared to defend the crates and the people under her watch at any cost. Waves of gunfire ebbed and flowed in the torrential downpour. Lightning flashes revealed fleeting images of men in dark clothing darting between boulders, muzzle flashes snapping in the gloom. Lucia pressed behind a dripping pine trunk, her breathing ragged. She keyed the radio. "Brady, do you have eyes on the attacker's approach?" A burst of static, then the deputy's voice tense. "Yes, at least 4 hostiles on foot, possibly more in the tree line. They're trying to flank us. We're holding them off at the main slope. 2 volunteers are pinned." Lucia risked a glance around the trunk. Rain stung her eyes. She spotted muzzle flashes near a cluster of small evergreens. Returning fire, she squeezed off controlled bursts. The responding shots whistled past her, forcing her to duck. The thunderous soundtrack of the storm merged with the pop, pop, pop of rifles, creating a surreal battlefield right here in Montana's backwoods. She sensed movement at her flank. Swinging her carbine around, she nearly fired before realizing it was Marcus. He was soaked to the bone but steady, a revolver in one hand and a flashlight in the other, angled low to avoid giving away their position. "Are you hurt?" he shouted over the rain. "No," she called back. "They're entrenched. We can't let them get near the tent." She meant the one holding the crates. If these men were paramilitary or iron mongrels, they could be trying to blow up or reclaim the stolen prototypes. She guessed the latter. The best-case scenario for them was to snatch back their precious contraband. The worst-case scenario was to destroy it so no one could use it as evidence. Marcus nodded, face taut. "We'll hold them." He angled the flashlight beam at the ground, providing a faint circle of visibility. Lucia used that moment to dash to a better vantage behind a fallen log. She motioned for Marcus to remain behind a trunk so they could cover each other if the enemy advanced. A renewed volley of gunfire tore through the night from a different angle, near the road. Over the radio, Deputy Brady's voice trembled. "They have a vehicle, black SUV, advancing on the barricade. We're returning fire." Lucia's heart sank. The attackers had come prepared. This was no mere skirmish. The criminals were launching a coordinated assault from multiple sides. Amid the chaos, Lucia caught glimpses of the ambushers' gear. At least one wore night vision goggles, the green glow reflecting in the storm. Another carried a short-barreled rifle with a suppressor. Professional equipment. She steadied her own rifle, counting the muzzle flashes, timing them. Then, waiting for the next flash, she squeezed the trigger. A strangled curse echoed from behind the rocks. She'd scored a hit, maybe not fatal, but enough to disrupt the enemy's fire. Reloading! Anna, a volunteer, yelled from somewhere uphill. Lucia switched to short, precise shots, giving the volunteer time to swap magazines. The lightning lit up the scene again, revealing a man creeping behind a boulder, presumably trying to circle around. Lucia fired. The muzzle snapped, blending with thunder. The figure dropped from view. She suspected they hadn't expected this level of resistance from simple ranchers. Still, the attackers pressed on. More gunfire erupted near the tent. Lucia's heart surged in alarm. She called into the radio, "Anyone at the tent, report!" Silence greeted her. She repeated more sharply, "This is Lucia. We have hostiles near the tent. Respond." A burst of static, then the faint voice of Gary, the retired logger. "They're pushing. We need help." Then the line cut out. Lucia's pulse hammered. If the attackers reached those crates, they could vanish with enough weaponry to arm a small army, or set off an explosion that might kill everyone present. She signaled Marcus, then broke cover, sprinting through the downpour toward the central clearing. If ever there was a moment to let the full might of Specter Zero loose, this was it. They were under siege in a storm-swept valley, the fate of lethal contraband hanging in the balance, and Lucia refused to let them fall. Lucia's boots splashed through puddles as she raced toward the tent. Gunfire crackled sporadically, echoing off the ravine. She spotted figures darting among the vehicles. A stray flash of lightning illuminated a black SUV. Passenger door open, muzzle flames spitting from inside. Bullets whizzed overhead. One volunteer scrambled for cover behind a pickup truck, clutching a wounded arm. Pressing herself against a sodden hay bale, Lucia glanced around the corner. The large canvas tent was about 20 yards ahead, half collapsed from bullet holes slashed through its fabric. She glimpsed Gary crouched behind a wooden crate, exchanging fire with at least two attackers who had taken cover behind the stacked crates of prototypes. The nerve of them, using the stolen weapons themselves as shields. Lucia raised her carbine, scanning for a clear shot. Through the sheets of rain, she counted the muzzle flashes. One attacker popped up to fire at Gary, and Lucia squeezed the trigger. Her shot clipped the man's shoulder, forcing him to drop. Another tried to dash around the tent's side, but Gary fired a shotgun blast that reverberated through the storm. The figure crumpled with a sharp cry, weapon clattering on the gravel. A fresh wave of bullets hammered the crates near Gary, forcing him to duck. Lucia realized at least one more hostile lurked behind the half-collapsed tent flap. She glanced around for a flanking route. The two volunteers hunkered behind a toppled picnic table, pinned by crossfire. Deputy Brady's voice crackled over the radio. "We're engaged at the barricade. SUV pinned down. 2 more suspects on foot. Status on the tent?" "Under siege," Lucia replied breathlessly. "We're pushing them back, but they're dangerously close to the crates." "Understood. Hang tight. We'll join you as soon as we can." Another crackle ended the transmission. Gritting her teeth, Lucia motioned to Gary, signaling they needed to approach from opposite sides. Gary nodded, reloading a fresh shell into his shotgun. Lucia slung her carbine over her shoulder and drew her pistol for maneuverability. She counted down with her fingers. 3, 2, 1. They emerged simultaneously, Gary laying down scattershot to suppress the attackers while Lucia sprinted across the open ground toward the tent's other side. The darkness, combined with the driving rain, offered cover as well as danger. She nearly tripped over a stray crate, half buried in mud. Regaining balance, she skidded around the tent's corner, where she found herself face to face with a masked gunman, kneeling behind a box of advanced weapon parts. The muzzle of his rifle pointed directly at her chest. Instinct took over. She dropped low, letting his shot sail overhead and pressed forward, driving her shoulder into his midsection. The impact sent them both crashing into the mud. He recovered quickly, swinging the rifle butt downward. Lucia managed to deflect with her forearm, pain jolting through her. She jabbed her pistol forward, but his arm knocked it aside. Rain blinded her as they grappled. The man was strong and skilled, maybe ex-military. Lucia twisted, recalling close-quarters combat drills. A swift elbow to his jaw knocked him back. She snatched up her pistol from the mud and pressed the barrel to his chest. Chest heaving, she hissed, "Drop it!" He froze for a heartbeat, then let go of the rifle. She kicked it away, breathing raggedly. The man slumped, cursing. Behind them, gunfire still echoed from the clearing. Lucia keyed the radio. One suspect down at the tent corner. Still more hostiles around. Need backup. A chaotic roar of engine noise signaled the SUV's attempt to escape near the barricade, accompanied by renewed gunfire. Lucia glanced at the tent's half-torn entrance, noticing that no more muzzle flashes came from inside. Perhaps they'd cleared it, but the swirling storm raged on, and she had no idea if more enemies lurked in the darkness. One thing was clear. The iron mongrels, or whoever financed them, had launched a last-ditch effort to reclaim or destroy the prototypes. And if Lucia and her makeshift allies failed tonight, the valley would be consumed by even more violence. On the far side of the clearing, Marcus Davenport crouched behind a toppled metal barrel, reloading his revolver with trembling hands. Adrenaline coursed through his veins. He could hardly believe this was his life, engaged in a nighttime firefight to protect stolen military tech. But he refused to yield. This was the land he and Lucia had cultivated for decades, the community they loved. He pressed the cylinder closed and peered over the barrel's rim. He spotted two figures skulking by the volunteer trucks. They seemed to be searching for a vantage point or a path to the crates. One turned his head briefly, revealing an iron mongrels patch. The other wore dark tactical gear. Marcus aimed carefully. He wasn't as skilled a shot as Lucia, but he could manage short to mid-range. Exhaling, he fired. Sparks danced off metal as the bullet struck the truck's fender, narrowly missing the pair. They darted behind the vehicle, returning fire blindly. Bullets pinged off the gravel near Marcus, sending shards of rock into his arm. Gritting his teeth, he ducked. A sudden flash of lightning revealed Deputy Brady sprinting across the road, weapon drawn. She slid next to Marcus in a spray of mud. "We've got them pinned at the SUV near the barricade, but they're not giving up," she gasped. "How's it here?" Marcus gestured toward the volunteers. "We're holding, but they keep trying to flank us. Lucia's near the tent. Shots stopped there, so maybe she secured it." Brady nodded, stealing a peek around the barrel. "We need to coordinate. If we can push them from both sides, we can trap them in the open. But we have to be sure Lucia's team is ready." Marcus activated his handheld radio. "Lucia, can you hear me? We're planning a pincer move. Give us a signal if you're set." Static crackled. No response. Fear pulsed through him. He tried again. "Lucia, do you copy?" Finally, her voice came through, crackling with interference. "I'm here. We've got at least one wounded hostile in custody. The tent's mostly clear. I can see a couple more near the trucks. Maybe the same ones you're fighting." She paused and they heard an exchange of nearby gunfire. "We'll move in from the east side." Relief flooded Marcus. Deputy Brady nodded resolutely. "Let's do it." They counted down softly, then broke from cover. Brady fired suppressive shots at the two criminals behind the truck, while Marcus advanced. His heart hammered as he charged forward, trying to keep steady aim through the rain. Return fire crackled, but the gunmen were caught off guard by the sudden push. One scrambled to reload, but Marcus closed the gap, aiming center mass. He squeezed the trigger. The man yelped, dropping his weapon. The other tossed his rifle aside and raised his hands, seeing the deputies closing in. From the east side, Lucia and Gary flanked swiftly, corralling any remaining threat. In less than a minute, the last pockets of resistance collapsed. A smattering of gunfire echoed from the barricade, likely the final skirmish near the SUV. Then the night fell eerily still, save for the pounding rain and the labored breaths of volunteers and deputies. One by one, they secured the attackers, binding hands behind backs. The scene mirrored the Pine Creek operation days earlier, but this time the carnage was more intense. Scattered bullet casings, torn tents, muddy footprints, and battered vehicles. They had taken casualties. 2 volunteers were wounded, though apparently not fatally. The enemy fared worse. Several lay bleeding, others groaning with broken bones. No one was in a mood to show them much sympathy, given they had invaded under cover of night. Lucia regrouped with Marcus and Brady near the collapsed tent, water streaming down her face. "Is that all of them?" she rasped. Brady spoke into her radio. The other deputies reported no further movement. The black SUV near the barricade was peppered with bullet holes, its occupants subdued. The hostiles they found wore no official insignias, but their gear was advanced, a hallmark of private military or specialized gangs. "Seems we're clear," Brady finally said. "But we need medical help, and we need to secure these detainees fast. If they have reinforcements, we can't linger." Lucia couldn't help glancing at the crates, battered but intact. Another victory, but at what cost? She surveyed the wounded volunteers, the bullet-ridden vehicles, the fear lingering in every face. The criminals had tried hard to reclaim their lethal cargo. Something told her these backers wouldn't stop until every piece of evidence was destroyed, or until they were dismantled completely. Dawn broke over a scene of exhaustion and relief. The storm clouds drifted away, leaving a damp, gray morning. Volunteers slumped against vehicles or crates, bandaging cuts and bruises. Deputies took stock of the captured attackers, 8 in total, 3 seriously wounded. One paramedic from the local volunteer fire department arrived, hastily treating injuries under a makeshift canopy. Though battered, the defenders had prevailed again. Lucia Davenport stood with Marcus, gazing across the muddy clearing. Crates of advanced weapons, rows of bullet casings, half-collapsed tents. She felt hollow, her limbs leaden. She'd been through extended firefights in the past, but then she'd always had a military infrastructure to handle the aftermath. Here it was just them, a few loyal deputies, and brave townspeople. She quietly thanked fate that no one on their side had been killed. The sense of closeness to tragedy, however, weighed heavily on her heart. Deputy Simone Brady approached, phone in hand. "I finally got through to the FBI," she said, voice tight with emotion. "They're dispatching a tactical team, ETA tonight or early tomorrow. They claim they're driving in from 2 states over." She glanced at the subdued attackers. "We also have state troopers en route for prisoner transport. With this number of detainees, Oaks can't plausibly meddle